Hello everyone, welcome to What If Hollow Knight Became a Hero in My Hero Academia Part 1. Before we start, please go support Keiko2051 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made, there will be some mistake in character's gender. Hikari, a young albino with a void in his heart, driven by a will left to him by his parents, will seek to become a hero who can protect people as his parents once did for him. Without knowing how or why, upon enrolling in the most famous hero academy, he will live adventures that will bring him emotions he longed to possess. Happiness, anger, sadness, confusion, pain, anguish and love. Chapter 1. What are people like? What motivates them to do what they do? What motivates them to be heroes? What are heroes? I don't know, because the only thing left in me is emptiness. Maybe at some point it will disappear, but if it's still there, I'll use it to protect people, just like they did to me. An explosion rocks a small part of Musatafu City in Tokyo, where a group of people were watching the small show that had been formed. Villains. The representation of evil in a word, or at least currently. Where people with powers exist, people with the ability to do things that others can't, the opportunity to be special. At the time when people with special abilities were a large part of the world's population, a new profession was created due to the need to stop the crime that was generated from powers or quirks as they are commonly known. Heroes. In a society where people acquire quirks naturally at the age of 4, the same children began to popularize the idea that fictional movie heroes could actually be a reality, so after quite a few years, the profession of hero was officially accepted as something real and legal. To take down villains who use their quirks to commit crimes on a scale greater than a normal criminal could, they themselves use the blessings they were given to decrease the crime rate. But always, when the light gains the intensity to overshadow the darkness, there is always a way to make the light go out. After a decade of suffering due to most villains being extremely powerful and one in particular, which we will omit for the moment, threatened to plunge the world into darkness. In the midst of the chaos, a symbol was born, All Might, current symbol of peace and provider of the most intense light, managed to corner the darkness and return peace to the world. Well, I think we've strayed a bit. Continuing with current events, we see that the center of the crowd's attention was in fact a battle between heroes and villains. Before, people would probably flee from these types of situations, but no longer. They don't have to flee because heroes protect people, using their quirks in a way that highlights their heroic image. The hero profession has changed over time. Now, the image of a hero is also something to take into account when choosing your favorite hero. By law, people cannot use their quirks unless they obtain a license, either as a hero or from another profession, that requires the use of specific quirks. Well, it seems I keep straying from what really matters in this story. It's not the battle of heroes and villains. It's not the crowd supporting their favorite heroes. It's a young man. A simple young man who isn't even in the crowd. On a street behind the battle that was taking place, there was a boy watching from a distance, analyzing the battle and the reactions of the public. Hikari. The 14-year-old boy, snow-white hair, quite long and disheveled, pale skin and deep-set black eyes, looking quite fragile due to the clothes that are larger than his actual size. The most striking characteristic he possesses are in fact horns. If you read correctly, he doesn't need an eye transplant yet. Wide horns that grew out of the top of his head and headed towards the back of it. An expression unreadable even to himself was permanently perched on his face as he watched the scene with mild curiosity. Suddenly remembering that he might actually be late to class by continuing to look, he kept moving forward, ignoring the cheers that could still be heard in the distance. Once he arrived at his destination, he went to his classroom where he patiently waited for the start of classes in his seat, which was in the middle of the classroom, with a perfect posture not noticed because his clothes were still bigger than his body. With his unreadable and empty gaze always present, he watched as his other classmates entered the classroom, some louder than others, some managed to look at him, and others simply ignored him. Anyway, he wouldn't know what to say. The young man with ash blonde hair entered, being without a doubt the loudest of his classmates. He walked to his seat with the arrogant air that characterizes him, and without looking anywhere, he placed his feet on the desk and lay down, already waiting for the dismissal bell, even though classes hadn't even started. Another young man stood out from the rest, not for being loud, but quite the opposite. He walked in, looking nervously around, and when he saw the ash blonde boy, he shuddered slightly and made his way as quietly as possible to his seat, not even noticing Hikari's gaze on him. A few minutes passed, and all the students entered, followed seconds later by the teacher, thus beginning the silence and ending the group discussions that had formed to await the teacher's arrival. Reading the documents he was holding, he began a short speech about the future his students could choose, which was interrupted by the same teacher throwing the papers and exclaiming with amusement that most of his students would aspire to be heroes instead of anything else. Coincidentally, he was right. Everyone in the class, except for a few, began to boast about their quirks, being stopped by the teacher, who mentioned that using their powers was against established law. When the small tumult stopped, the young ash blonde-haired man spoke, still with his feet on the desk. Don't compare me to these extras. I will be the best hero in history, surpass even All Might, and I will be number one. He openly declared, despising his classmates who actually complained about it afterwards. Ah, Kitsuki Bakugo, huh, said the teacher, lightly flipping through the papers in his hand. You plan to join UA, right? That comment started a chain of murmurs that grew louder with each moment, but were silenced again by another comment from the teacher. Ah, it seems that Izuku Midoriya and young Hikari will also be applying there, he mentioned with amusement, upon seeing the names and photos of the two students on their papers. The classroom fell into a deathly silence that was overwhelmingly broken by the thunderous, angry voice of Kitsuki, who first launched himself at Izuku, arguing that a person without a quirk like him could never become a hero. After that comment, the entire class, except of course our young Hikari, began to laugh uncontrollably, unleashing a wave of embarrassment in Izuku that was replaced with fear as he heard Kitsuki aggressively interrogate him if what he wanted was to get in the way of his path to greatness. Hikari on the other hand just watched the situation, not understanding Kitsuki's sudden anger towards Izuku or why it was so important to have a quirk to be a hero or to be the only one in the building who got into the prestigious UA high school that only admitted 2% of the applicants. After scaring Izuku, he directed his anger at Hikari, who continued to watch the events with her unreadable and blank face. Kitsuki gathered what he could remember of his name and appearance that in his eyes was just another extra, not knowing in fact that he himself was a secondary character in this story. Hikari is a person of little or no presence who in fact almost never speaks and who has not seen his quirk in action. It is known that he has one due to the horns he has, but he has never stood out greatly in sports or academics, being a person who constantly stays average. He did not believe he could get in anyway, so he decided to make fun of him anyway. And you haven't even shown what your quirk can do, maybe it's just those stupid horns, anyways I want to be remembered as the only person in this building who enters UA, do you understand? Hikari just nodded to his question, unaffected by the sudden attempt to intimidate him. That's good because that means you don't want to get in anymore, right? Hikari denied his statement, more so because he knows he can do it and besides, there's no loss in not trying. Itsuki was visibly affected by his answers, he just denied that, has anyone even done that? He was about to jump on him when the teacher ordered him to sit down. Although he could have done it, that would really affect his resume, which is given to high schools to see what kind of people try to join their establishments. He went to sit down reluctantly, muttering under his breath that he would see him later. Hikari observed his attitude, still not understanding the attempts at intimidation or the obsessive dream of being number one, so she simply let it go and focused her attention on the class that had just started. After the teacher had ended the class, Kitsuki advanced threateningly towards Hikari, who was putting his school supplies away neatly in his backpack, ignoring the fact that he was about to finish. Kitsuki kicked the backpack, surprising Hikari, and of course scattered his supplies on the floor, drawing the attention of some students who were leaving for their homes, including Izuku, who was looking just a few seats away. Hey emo albino, you and I haven't finished talking. Despite the attempt to irritate and intimidate Hikari again, he actually didn't seem affected in the least and stared at Kitsuki, studying his expressions and gestures. It seems that I will have to teach you not to get in my way by force. Kitsuki threatened, generating small explanations in the palm of his right hand in front of Hikari's face, who continued looking, still not fully understanding Bakugo. Stop Kakin, that's not what a hero would do. Izuku tried to reason, although it only caused Kitsuki's growing anger to be directed at him. The people around, knowing what would happen to Izuku, left the place, losing the sudden interest in the dispute, except for Kitsuki and Hikari's friends of course. Shut up damn Deku, you also want to get in my way, don't you? You don't even have a kind of gift, how the hell do you want to get into UA being a damn Deku? He practically spelled out the word Deku to emphasize his point. Unlike Hikari, Izuku was more affected than anyone by Kitsuki's bullying, who seemed to be shaking in fear and helplessness. I already mentioned it to you, they removed the rule that quirkless can't enter UA, so someone like me still has a chance. He mentioned those words as best he could, which enraged Kitsuki even more, who happened to see the book Izuku was holding in his arm, snatching it away and handing it to one of his friends behind his back. Analysis of heroes for the future. You've got to be kidding. Kitsuki's companion mentioned and then burst out laughing several times. Kitsuki took the notebook again, looked at it for a moment, and then generated an explosion in the hand that was holding the notebook, burning a large part of it and then throwing it out the nearest open window, being watched by a powerless Izuku and Hikari. After that, Kitsuki started a march towards the exit accompanied by his friends, mentioning that maybe if he committed suicide, he would get a quirk in his next life. Izuku seemed to get enraged and tried to confront Katsuki, who only threatened him with a look and a few explosions in his hands to stop the young Midoriya's attack of courage in its tracks. Hikari, on the other hand, was left aside, redundantly, not speaking and not moving more than his head to look at things better resulted in disappearing Katsuki's anger, who seemed to rejoice in the words and actions done against the two antisocial young men. Izuku was quieter for a moment, waiting for Katsuki to disappear into the hallways to finally notice the young albino standing next to him. Hikari-san, right?" Nodding to his question, Hikari saw how the young man's expression seemed to relax a bit without Katsuki's presence nearby. "Why you shouldn't make Kaken angry?" That comment generated even more confusion in Hikari. Not make him angry? Did it make him angry? Why was he angry? Why does he say that if he also says bad things to him? Those questions flooded Hikari's brain, which strangely changed his expression slightly to that of a bewildered one. "Did I do something wrong?" The young albino spoke, surprising Izuku and also generating confusion in him. "No, of course not, it's just that, well, it wouldn't do you any good to make Kaken angry." With the same look, Hikari questioned that it was logical for people to get angry when people do something wrong, and that he didn't understand the reason for Katsuki's anger. Izuku actually thought about Hikari's words. Actually, people get angry over something they dislike, but in fact it didn't have to be for something bad. Well, in the end he came to the strange conclusion that he really wasn't doing anything wrong by thinking he could be a hero, being that he was, and that he should have realized from the beginning. Remembering his notebook, Izuku left Hikari alone as he ran towards the rescue of his notebook, leaving the young albino confused, who with nothing else to do, picked up his things from the ground and headed home. Along the way he watched as Izuku walked through the streets with his wet notebook and decided not to get involved further, so following his path, Hikari observed the people she came across. One would think it would be something strange, but considering that the young albino does not understand the normal behavior of people in general, it was quite reasonable that he of all things would study people's behavior. Once at his home, a small apartment that was given to him by the government because he was studying and could no longer stay in an orphanage due to his age, N.A. Obviously this is not true, I think, but I'll leave it that way because I like it that way. He entered and found a small living room that was his place to watch television. To the right was his kitchen, and at the end of the hallway was his bedroom and bathroom. Walking calmly, he hung the backpack he was carrying on a hook that was to the right of the living room. He headed to his room where he found a small closet where he obviously kept his clothes, a small desk and a medium bed. The room does not really have any decoration, so it looked quite empty, not to mention how tidy it looked. Hearing a fluffy sound coming from the living room, Hikari watched as a black cat with blue eyes peeked around the door while he took off his uniform and hung it carefully next to the closet. Changing into a more comfortable set of clothes such as a gray shirt and a black coat along with dark blue shorts, he went to the kitchen where he took out a box of cat food from a cabinet. Taking the plate he kept for him, he left it on the floor while he poured the food. Then he went to the refrigerator and took out a carton of milk which he poured over the cat food, being patiently watched by the cat. Once enough milk was poured, I removed the box, and the cat began to calmly eat its food, while Hikari prepared to make his lunch, cooked rice along with some fish and a soda. He sat at the small table that was there, and began the process of eating food, calmly looking at the wall while he did so. He felt a caress on his leg, and watched as the cat rubbed against it and purred, asking for affection that was given by Hikari, after he finished eating and washed his dishes. Sitting on the small armchair while he turned on the TV and the cat lay down on his lap, he was like that for a few hours, watching the news and entertainment channels that didn't really entertain him. The only interesting thing was the fact that his companions Katsuki and Izuku were involved in a battle with a slime mud villain and being rescued seconds later by the symbol of peace, thus discovering why the sudden change in weather. Realizing that the cat fell asleep on his lap, a crossroads arose. He should take a bath, but he didn't want to wake the cat. But if he didn't wake the cat he wouldn't be able to take a shower. But if he moved the cat, there was a high possibility that it would wake up. Deciding that it was best to move the cat, he moved and placed one of the cushions as a replacement for his lap so as not to wake the cat and went to take a shower. After the shower, while he dried himself, he looked in the mirror and saw that apart from his horns, his pale skin, his black eyes that were strange due to his white complexion, he noticed how a necklace hung from his neck, which brought with it a strange circular object, quite flat, but not enough to not be a spherical figure. It was ironically white, with two black circles resembling an eye, while more lines surrounded the figure. It was the only thing he has from his parents, or so Hikari believes, because when they died that fateful starry night, they found him with a strange necklace hanging from his neck. At only the age of 4, he had become an orphan. Not even he knew why he kept it if he couldn't even remember the names or faces of his parents, because they didn't even find their bodies with him, and there were no acquaintances or relatives to take him in. He was taken to the orphanage. Returning to the present. Hikari traced the lines of the necklace with his hand, feeling the strange material it possessed. He never ever separated from it. Strangely, he felt tied to it more than by the chain that held him, and then he remembered why he was in fact applying to be a hero. His parents. The only thing he remembers about them is that they died protecting him. In his memory, he was afraid, but they told him that he had nothing to fear because they would protect him. And he felt so safe, so warm, it felt so good that it remained engraved like an indelible scar in his mind, but after that he felt nothing, a nothingness that frightens most people. There was a void so deep that even now it hadn't been filled even a little, a void that left him with no interest in anything or anyone, a void fueled only by the few memories he possessed at that age. The things they teach in classes and such, he can learn, but things like social and human relationships seemed infinitely complex to him, hence his interest in studying people. In fact, he didn't even feel sadness when he learned of the most likely death of his tutors. He felt nothing and couldn't say anything about it, which is why he speaks so rarely. There was never a real interest in anything he did. Maybe the only thing that was an exception was his cat Kuro. It's because he found him on the street in the rain. An inexplicable feeling arose inside him as he watched the little kitten look at his face, and ironically he remembered his parents' words, so he simply adopted the kitten. Although they didn't allow pets in the apartment, Kuro was in fact a quite quiet animal, so he only meowed when he came back from class or when he wanted food. Speaking of Kuro, Hikari remembered that she had to groom him. She generally combed him every day to remove the excess hair he had and bathed him every now and then when his smell started to get stronger, obviously taking care that the water was neither too cold nor too hot due to the sensitivity of his skin. Coming out of the bathroom already dressed and with a towel around his neck so his hair wouldn't wet his clothes, he went to his room and from a piece of furniture he took out a comb. It was actually a comb that he modified slightly because the ones he used scratched Kuro's skin a little, so he made its tip a little softer by getting the same material that was used to make the strips of the comb. He made some small spheres and placed them on the tip of each strip. It took a while, but Kuro liked it, so for Hikari it was worth it, and well, it wasn't like she had any entertainment, she didn't have that much money, and what she had was generally to buy what she needed, so things like cell phones, computers and consoles were things she couldn't afford. Well, back to the subject. Calling the cat, he sat down on the couch and Kuro lay down on his lap, already knowing what he would do when he saw the comb in his hand. He let Hikari comb his hair, who carefully and gently ran the comb through the cat's black fur. Curiously, the young albino had no plans to be a hero until he adopted Kuro and remembered his parents. After voting Kuro's hair from the comb into the trash, he washed his hands and prepared dinner for him, and well, he also gave Kuro some food, who strangely remained in good shape despite the fact that he was fed quite frequently. Due to a small carelessness when he saw Kuro carelessly bump into the table leg, the knife he was putting away slipped from his hand, but before it even hit the floor, a black substance took the knife and returned it to its owner. Empty. Likewise his quirk was named, although without understanding why horns were coming out of his head, it was named empty due to the lack of interest or understanding of feelings, leaving only the emptiness of a vessel. The characteristics and what it is used for will be seen another time. Right now we focus on how Hikari sat at the table enjoying his dinner. A few months have passed. Our young Hikari dedicated himself solely to studying because he realized that perhaps his academic level was not enough. He simply discarded the idea of training his quirk because he strangely feels that there is nothing he cannot do with it. Although it sounds quite arrogant, he is quite confident in his power. Right now we see our young albino protagonist in his usual classes. The only difference that he apparently noticed was that Izuku Midoriya is using an instrument that allows training the user's grip strength under his desk. It was already strange enough that he always seemed tired, but now it seems that even at this moment he has the energy to do that kind of training. Downplaying it, he continued with his own business while mentally making a shopping list he had to do after school. After school ended, the first to leave was a hurried Izuku Midoriya, who, well, no one was interested in because it had become a habit. Immediately after, Katsuki and his group left the classroom. Later, our young albino left the establishment to head downtown to do some shopping since his pantry was running low. Looking at the number of stores around him, he walked over to the one he usually visited, where he was greeted by a little old lady with neat purple hair and a pair of wings sticking out of her back. "Oh, look, Hikari, are you out of groceries again?" the old lady asked, amused, as she watched the young albino nod. Suddenly, laughter was heard, and a couple of children came out from behind the lady while playing until they found Hikari, and their eyes seemed to sparkle when they saw the horns she had. Look, grandma has horns!" exclaimed the boy excitedly while pointing at Hikari's horns. "Whoa, are you very white, right?" the girl approached while pulling on his pants, making Hikari look at the girl with mild curiosity. Wasn't this kind of thing normal? He had seen in the distance a girl who literally had pink skin and yellow horns. The old lady apologized for her grandchildren's attitude, saying that their parents asked her to take care of them for today. Hikari understood the situation, although she didn't react visibly. For the old lady it was normal, but for some reason the boy thought she didn't want to answer him. "Hey, you know you have to answer when someone speaks to you, right?" Hikari blinked a couple of times upon hearing the boy's annoyed tone. For him it wasn't necessary to answer, but if that was wrong at least he would try to answer more. "I understand," he said softly, making the children look at him, and both of their eyes shone. "Well, you have a very pretty voice," said the children, who began to play around her, asking her several questions about her quirk, about if she was strong, etc. The grandmother was surprised to hear Hikari's voice. It was so strange to hear it that she thought she was mute. On the other hand, Hikari was trying to handle the situation. She didn't know how to answer so many questions at once, so she simply did the first thing that came to mind and crouched down to her height. They stood in front of him and watched as he extended a hand, and a black flower came out of it and began to spin in his palm. Whoa. Even though it was illegal to use his powers outside, he thought it was the only way to stop their curiosity, but he was masterfully wrong because they started demanding that he make other figures, and so he did. He made a bird, a fish, All Might, and different heroes. He continued like this until he remembered why he had gone to that market in the first place, and looked at the old woman who was watching the scene amused, and despite the fact that she said nothing, the lady approached and with her wings, gently took the children who complained at first, but a single look from the old woman was enough for them to remain silent and obey, when she returned them behind the counter to the back of the store and turned to attend to the young albino. After the strange interaction he had with the children, he got what he needed and left there, heading home, but not before stopping to buy food for Kuro. When he returned home, he first served Kuro food and then put the things he had brought in their respective places so that after that he could prepare food. After all that, changing clothes and cleaning the house a bit, I decided it was time to go for a walk with Kuro. So, taking a small leash that I used to tie to the cat's collar, I went out for a walk. Every now and then, Kuro asked to be carried, which Hikari did because she didn't see any problem. During the walk, she found the beach looked much cleaner than she remembered, so she simply let it pass and continued her walk normally. When they arrived home, Hikari fed Kuro and then ate dinner. Once she filled the pond, she headed to her room to study, preparing for the UA entrance exam. After she finished studying, she prepared to shower, bathe Kuro, and then go to sleep. That routine was carried out during the remaining months before the exam, although simply studying that does not mean that he neglected the practice of his quirk, because he used it from time to do his daily tasks, such as cleaning, cooking, etc. The day of the exam was relatively normal in the morning. He woke up at the time he usually wakes up, either 7 am or 7:30 am, in this case at 7 am. He did the normal morning rituals, such as brushing his teeth, face and changing clothes. Then he would see if Kuro was awake to feed him and then have breakfast. Once the pond was filled, he reviewed a little what he had studied and headed for the exam. On the way he found a broccoli with legs which he decided to accompany. Although Izuku was certainly surprised by the sudden appearance, he relaxed when he noticed that it was in fact Hikari. If Izuku remembered, he was the only person he had no idea about his abilities. He was always quite laid back and never showed expression, not even laughing when his quirkiness was mentioned. If he thought about it, he could easily count the times he's talked to Hikari on one hand. He noticed that lately he'd improved a lot academically. In fact, he surpassed him in many areas, but the only thing he knew about him was that he actually only had horns. They walked in comfortable silence because Izuku knew of Hikari's lack of talkativeness, and he himself wasn't thinking about a conversation he could have with him. When they reached the entrance, Izuku stopped for a moment, being noticed by the young albino, who saw how he tried to take a dramatic step, only to trip over his foot and fall to the ground, only to be stopped in midair by a girl who gracefully mentioned that it wouldn't be much luck to fall before taking the exam. Izuku was paralyzed due to the sudden appearance of the smiling girl. That he apologized for using his quirk without permission. "Are you nervous about the exam too?" she asked with a smile, being received by Izuku's silence and Hikari's denial, slightly surprising the girl, who looked at him and asked, "Are you really not nervous?" "Because I am. Well, good luck, see you." And so the conversation ended. While the smiling girl went on her way to the exam, Hikari looked curiously at how Izuku seemed to come out of his paralysis, so little to mention that he had talked to a girl. The albino just looked at this curiously and decided not to give it more importance and headed to the exam with the green-haired man. Chapter 2. Once inside the building, they headed to the written exam area, which to Hikari's surprise, was not as complicated as he thought. This is because he only dedicated himself to studying when he had free time, and in class, he paid more attention than usual. During the exam, Izuku and the albino were separated, but even a few seats away, he could hear Izuku muttering about the practical exam, about a quirk and something else that he couldn't hear due to the distance, and how fast he mumbled. When the written exam ended, he joined again with the green-haired man who was still surprised that he accompanied him. They went to an orientation room for the practical exam where he sat between Katsuki and Izuku, who glanced at each other from time to time. At one point during the orientation, Izuku began to mutter again before being interrupted by a young man with dark blue hair, who asked an exaggerated question about a fourth robot shown in the guidebook, objecting to how an elite school could let such a thing go. After that, he pointed accusingly at the green-haired man, who was trembling nervously after being reprimanded for his habit of muttering out loud. When the teacher calmed the situation, he explained that the fourth robot was in fact one they had to avoid due to its difficulty, and that it would not award points for defeating it. Apologizing and thanking the teacher for the answer, he sat back down to give way to the rest of the meeting. When they looked at the places to participate, they discovered that Katsuki and Izuku were in different areas. Katsuki mumbled something about it being to avoid helping each other and then complained to Hikari and Izuku for looking at his brochure. Hikari and the others left the room and headed to their respective seats. Hikari looked curiously at the people around him. It was strange how many quirks could be found. He casually found the girl with pink skin and horns that he had seen out of the corner of his eye at the market. He also found a Redeed who had very pointy teeth and a girl who seemed to be always smiling, except that a long tongue was sticking out of her mouth. When he looked again, the entrance to the training area of an artificial city, he was surprised at how precise they were when it came to making simulated cities. He thought for a bit before the doors opened. If there was a countdown, he would skip it when he saw the open doors. There was a possibility that they would take away points for that, but that way he wouldn't have to be worried when they tried to take some points away from him by destroying the robots first. As the doors began to open, the emptiness of his quirk began to surround him and propelled him like a gust of black wind which entered when there was enough space in the door. The other students watched as the whitest person they had ever seen was suddenly surrounded by a black substance which transformed his appearance. His silhouette was hidden, only 2 white circles around his eyes remained. The rest was completely covered. When he moved, he passed through the door with just enough space to enter. Returning to Hikari. Some complained that he tried to get ahead of them before the supervisor reprimanded them, saying that heroes don't wait for the countdown. They ran after our young albino. As he advanced, he encountered the first enemy, a one-point robot that tried to launch itself at him, but its head was torn from its body when Hikari sent more of her quirk into her arm, transforming her arm into a large claw that with a swipe destroyed the robot's head and continued advancing, encountering some more level 1 that he defeated with ease. He encountered a different level 2 robot which attacked him with missiles which pierced his body when he was surrounded again by his quirk. And did the same as with most level 1 robots and destroyed the robot's head when he was close enough. Everything was going well up to that point, he hadn't taken any damage and there was still a long way to go until his quirk use limit. Until suddenly a huge robot came out and fell near his position. Seeing that it was unnecessary to confront it, he was about to turn around when he saw a couple of hurt kids near the robot. Looking around, he also saw that there were a few who were paralyzed with fear and could barely take a step. Then he decided it was best to get rid of that robot. Running towards the metal giant, he caught its attention and threw a punch with his metal fist. Once again, covered in vacuum, he passed through the punch and landed on his feet and began to run along its arm. The robot launched a pair of missiles at him, which also pierced his body. Black wings materialized and he made a great leap and glided until he reached its head. Once on it, she jumped again and concentrated a large part of her quirk into her fist and propelled herself down. The other students present saw how the robot's attacks literally passed through her body when she covered herself with her quirk, and when they saw her jump on the robot's head, they saw how a black glow came out of her body and concentrated in her arm. Afterwards, the black meteor fell straight on the robot's head, splitting it in half along with the body. When Hikari touched the ground with her fist, a vacuum explosion was generated that passed through what was left of the robot, which exploded, generating large gusts of wind that moved Hikari from where she was towards the rest of the students who looked astonished at what had happened. Getting up with a slight stumble, Hikari seemed to be fine and began to walk calmly with his usual unreadable and empty face towards the remaining robots before they heard that time was up and the tension disappeared. Before Hikari could react, he was surrounded by a large crowd of students congratulating him on his power or saying that what he had done was great and various other compliments which he really couldn't understand. Although some of those in the crowd complained that he just wanted attention and wetn't it. Then the situation calmed down when an old woman appeared asking about some injured people who came to her for attention. When she looked at Hikari, she saw the scratches he had from having fallen when the explosion of the robot sent him flying. She approached and placed a small kiss on his leg which began to heal quickly, although unlike the others he was healthy when the void concentrated on the wounds and they disappeared along with it. "You were very good, here's a little present," Brahma mentioned as she extended her hand, which was received by Hikari's, who was surprised when he saw candy fall into her hand. Looking at it for a few seconds, he removed the wrapper and put the candy in his mouth, savoring the sweetness it possessed. Thanking him for the gift, he left the training area and headed home. When he arrived, he did what he always did. He changed into the sportswear he wore for the exam, fed Kuro, and prepared his lunch. He ate and sat with Kuro to watch television, and then he took a shower, cleaned Kuro's fur and went to prepare dinner, fed Kuro again, and got ready to sleep. A week had passed and that day he received the results of his exam. Strangely, he realized it when he saw Kuro playing in the entrance with the results letter. Calmly, he took it from his mouth and went with Kuro in his arms to the room, where he sat at the desk and took out the small device from the letter. "I am here in a projection." All Might shouted in a strange way, murmuring the number of times he had said that already. Young Hikari. Hikari what? Orphan. Oh, I understand, young Hikari, I come to inform you that you were successfully accepted into UA High School in the Heroes course, Class 1A. Also, I would like to congratulate you for obtaining first place in the practical exam, although most of the points are from villains, that was not all, because you risked your integrity by extraordinary defeating the level 0 robot, you were given hero points that allowed you to position yourself in first place on the entire list. Congratulations, this is your Hero Academy. When the broadcast ended, a screen was shown with the results of both the practical and written exams. In the written he obtained 5th place. The first was given to a person named Momoyoi Rozu, with a small symbol in the name because he took the recommendation exam. Then he looked at the list of practical exams and saw his name in first place, although it was strange that there was no last name next to his name. He saw how Katsuki was in second place, with all the points obtained from villains, which even surpassed his own record of villain points. He saw how Izuku Midoriya was in 7th place with only 60 hero points and no villain points. He saw the 3rd place, one of recommendation, Shoto Todoroki, with most of the villain points and a few hero points. Turning off the projection, he put the device in a drawer of the desk furniture and went to prepare dinner, waiting for the days left for the start of school. I hear Kuro meow and look at him. With an invisible smile he began to caress Kuro, who gladly accepted his caresses. The day had arrived, the beginning of his life as an aspiring hero. The day started normally, getting up earlier than usual. He saw Kuro asleep in his bed in the living room. He went to the bathroom to do his morning toilet and changed into the new uniform he would wear from now on. Looking at himself slightly in the mirror, he got used to the clothes that were again a little bigger than they should be. Still not very aware of how he dressed, he prepared breakfast and left Kuro's food served for when he woke up. He took his backpack and left for his new academy. On the way he observed how some people were starting their working life. After taking the train that was almost empty due to the time, he got off calmly and walked at a relaxed pace until he reached the entrance and saw a certain green-haired man look a little nervous but determined at the entrance. Then he approached and Izuku saw his silhouette and his eyes shone before congratulating him for getting first place. He just accepted the gesture. Congratulations on getting into the academy. Izuku was again surprised to hear him congratulate him for getting in, and a few tears escaped and he nodded while smiling. Then Hikari began to walk inside the building, being followed closely by Izuku, who looked at him from time to time, trying to figure out how he got first place. Once they arrived at the entrance of his classroom, Hikari looked at the size of the door and Izuku hesitated a little to enter, although he entered when he saw Hikari open the door and walk inside in a relaxed manner. Izuku cursed his luck when he saw the blue-haired boy with glasses scold Katsuki for having his feet up on the table. When the boy with glasses' eyes met Izuku's, he approached at a robotic pace, while Izuku thought he was going to scold him for something. "I apologize, my name is Iida Tenya, I see you discovered the hidden purpose of the exam." Izuku's head started to spin faster before he realized that the newcomer Iida was talking about hero or rescue points. I was just doing what a hero is supposed to do, right?" He said, a little embarrassed that they would think he was smarter than he was, and Izuku exclaimed that if it had been a real situation, he would have done the same thing. "Hey, I know that hair and those horns," exclaimed a person behind them. When they turned around they saw the girl who helped Izuku at the entrance of the exam and who was later saved by Izuku from the level 0 robot. "I think I didn't introduce myself, my name is Ichako Uraraka, I don't think I know your names." The first to respond was Izuku, who shivering said his name, and Ichako's gaze went to our favorite albino. "Hikari," he said simply. Some in the room gasped and Katsuki felt his anger rise, although it seems that Ichako was not aware of his first place position, so she asked something else. "And your last name?" she asked, somewhat curious. "I'm an orphan," Hikari mentioned calmly, surprising the entire class except for Izuku and Katsuki, who had known him before. And I'm very sorry, I didn't mean to be rude." Thinking that these kinds of questions would bother Hikari, she quickly apologized, but her apology was accepted by Hikari, who just nodded before trying to go to his seat but was stopped by another voice. "You're not here to make friends." They quickly turned around only to see a person who looked like a yellow caterpillar, only it wasn't a caterpillar, it was a person in a sleeping bag. It took them 7 seconds to notice me, put that on and follow me. He said, getting out of his bag and showing a sports uniform in his hand. Without objecting or saying anything, Hikari was the first to follow him. Given the others' doubts, they followed his example. Once outside, they headed to a spacious area with different areas that could be used to measure physical qualities. Okay, now, let me introduce myself. I'm Shota Izawa. I'll be your teacher until you graduate. You'll be taking some quirk measurement tests. Said the now teacher Shota, with a bored look as he analyzed his new class. Wait, what about orientation? Ichako said, a little disoriented by her teacher's sudden test. If you're going to be heroes, you don't need to waste time on that, now. She said as she looked at her class until she pointed at Hikari who looked somewhat confused. Hikari, right. You were in first place, tell me your ball throwing record. He mentioned a little tired, and Hikari said that her record was 60 meters. Okay, now use your quirk. She said as she threw the ball to him, which Hikari caught and headed to the circle designated by her teacher. Use your quirk but don't leave the circle, I expect you to give it your all. Hikari looked at her teacher before looking at the ball in her hand and prepared herself, the void surrounded her body and concentrated in her arm before she threw it with all the strength she could muster. But the beastly roar the sphere increased in size due to the void, and a face with wide eyes and mouth was generated in the direction it was heading, crossing the sky as if a black wind propelled it, and before leaving its reach, it gave it a secondary boost by making a vacuum explosion that generated a large gust of wind, and the floating void began to return to it calmly. Some looked astonished and others scared due to the strange shape that its power generated, one of them in particular thought that their quirks were similar. Izawa was curious because in the exam his power only showed that form when it surrounded his body and did not turn into some kind of violent beast. Does that always happen? Izawa asked. A little surprised by the shape of his peculiarity. It only happens when I concentrate a large amount and separate it from my body. He mentioned with his usual unreadable and empty face. Why did you make it explode? Izawa asked again. I have a range limit and it vanishes if I go over that limit, so it would have only gone that far if I hadn't made it explode. Izawa had already sensed that, but he wanted his students to see what they were up against. Okay, now know your limits. He said, showing the small device that showed the amount of 784.3 meters. Whoa, how fun. Mentioned the girl with pink skin and horns. And others started to think about how they would use their powers to do something like that. How not very bright. Mentioned a blonde-haired boy with a belt on his stomach, although strangely there seemed to be sparkles around his figure when he said that. So fun, huh? Mentioned Shota Izawa with a smile that gave chills to much of the class. Okay, the last place will be expelled. Most of the class paled, although Hikari can't pale anymore, it wasn't necessary because he wasn't affected by the threat. So the tests continued. In the speed test, he stood out a bit but still fell behind Ida due to his quirk, although he surpassed Katsuki because the explosions didn't provide good balance when he was in the air. Izuku, on the other hand, was able to run faster than several people, but he still didn't get as fast as those with quirks that could provide some speed. Then came the jumping test. Hikari came in close to first place because her quirk also helped, doing something similar to what she did in the entrance test. Katsuki passed it without problems and even surpassed Hikari because the explosions provided a greater boost, although without a doubt the best was a girl with a long tongue and frog-like appearance named Issei, who just jumped and broke all records. In the grip strength test, Mizo Shoji stood out, very tall with multiple arms, who made a total weight of 540 kilograms, Izuku was a little above average due to his training, and Hikari made a total of 115 kilograms due to the vacuum boost. Next came the side jump test, in which surprisingly a short young man with purple hair stood out. He could make spheres that he could take out of his head and use them to adhere to various surfaces and bounce off of them. Using that method, he placed the spheres on the edges of the ladder used for side jumps, and with the jumps, he propelled himself from one side to the other, jumping at high speed. Since Hikari had already done the throwing test, he didn't have to do it, so he stepped back a bit and watched how his teammates managed. First was Katsuki, who used his explosions to generate shock waves that gave additional impulses to the ball, although since the impulses were given at the time of the throw, it resulted in a shorter effect, so his score of 705.3 meters was lower than Hikari's, which was 784.3 meters. When he discovered that, Katsuki tried to throw himself over Hikari, only to be stopped by Professor Izawa. Another surprise was in fact a girl with jet black hair who literally created a cannon that did not exceed the limits of the circle and still reached quite far, a distance of 201.4 meters. Then it was Achako's turn, who used her quirk to completely remove the gravity from the ball, thus resulting in a nice infinity symbol when the ball left the atmosphere. Izuku, on the other hand, had to take the test twice because Professor Shota Izawa, also known as the Eraser Hero Erasehead, temporarily erased his quirk to scold him when he saw that he was trying to hurt himself like in the entrance exam. That comment confused several of his classmates, including Hikari. Well, he knew that Izuku didn't have a quirk, but is it strange that they say that he gets hurt when using a quirk he doesn't have? Maybe there is a possibility, at least in Hikari's head, that because his quirk causes damage to the bearer, they prohibit him from using it. He wasn't so sure either, it was that or someone gave him a quirk, which is almost impossible, because it would have to be a quirk specialized in the accumulation of gifts, and on that the power to transfer it, something that has not occurred in registered cases, because it would have already made news worldwide. Well, leaving that topic aside. Izuku looked at the ball in his hand, analyzing the possibilities, and prepared to throw. The throw was similar to Katsuki's, and in fact it reached the same distance. The problem, he sacrificed a finger in the process. Izawa-sensei can still move. Even though he was crying due to the pain, he stood firm and determined. Izawa was so surprised that he couldn't help but smile strangely. Katsuki on the other hand reacted more openly by trying to launch himself at Izuku with his explosions, being stopped by Erasehead by deactivating his quirk and using the bandages he used as a scarf to wrap Katsuki up, who tried to resist, but it was impossible because the bandages were reinforced, so only a person who possessed a quirk could break them, and because his quirk coincidentally is to erase quirks, well you know. Then he showed the test results, which he mentioned that the numbers that showed at home result were just that, a number, because the way in which the quirks are used is qualified. 1 Momo Yaoi Rozu. 2 Hikari. 3 Shoto Todoroki. 4 Katsuki Bakugu. 5 Ida Tenya. 6 Tokoyami Fumikage. 7 Shoji Mizo. 8 Ijiro Mashirao. 9 Kirishima Ijiro 10. Ishito Mina. 11 Uraraka Achako. 12 Kota Koji. 13 Aoyama Yuga. 14 Asui Tsuyu. 15 Hanta Siro. 16 Kaminari Denki. 17 Jiro Kyoka. 18 Hagakure Toru. 19 Minoru Mineta. 20 Izuku Midoriya. Then he mentioned with a creepy smile that the threat of expulsion was just a joke, make them give their all on the tests. That was pretty obvious if they thought about it. The raven-haired girl mentioned, though she sounded a bit arrogant. After Professor Izawa sent Izuku to the infirmary, he ordered his class to go back to their classroom to continue their lessons. Once they arrived, Izawa designated each student's seats. Some were lucky enough to be with the people they knew the most, although it wasn't much because they had just started getting to know each other. That was the case with Izuku, although he possibly didn't like sitting next to Iida very much, who was quite neutral about the whole situation. In any case, he wasn't there at that moment to know it. Hikari had to sit at the back, to her right was the raven-haired girl, and to her left was Shoji Mizo. It wasn't too important to him, although it would be more comfortable to be with Midoriya and, strangely, Katsuki. At least that's his thought, although it's obviously known that it would be much less relaxed with Katsuki and his constant murder attempts. The class continued relatively normally, silence and the teacher's lecture were the only things that accompanied the class. Until after a few hours, Izuku peeked through the door somewhat sleepy and the teacher indicated that he should sit in his designated seat. With some nerves, he sat next to Ida, who in an exaggerated and robotically hoped they would get along that year. The raven-haired girl next to him suddenly asked if he had met the green-haired boy, Hikari just nodded, and that ended their conversation. During the rest of the class, the teacher gave her a free pass because it was her first day. Most of her classmates started talking, including, oddly enough, Katsuki, who was chatting animatedly with a red-haired boy who was laughing at the ash-haired boy's violent reactions. Izuku, on the other hand, started writing quickly in his notebook, and Iida watched Iida write out of the corner of his eye. Momo was calmly chatting with the girl in front of them, who had some kind of jacks on her earlobes. Hikari looked curiously at the exemption of her body until suddenly, the same girl who had discovered the albino's curiosity, threatened to bury herself in her body. "Stop looking at me like that," he said somewhat annoyed. Hikari just nodded and returned her gaze to the front, where she suddenly saw Izuku shyly approach him. Hi Hikari-san, would you mind telling me about your quirk?" Hikari shook her head, and Izuku seemed to brighten when he saw that it didn't bother her. Despite saying that, Hikari didn't say another word and Izuku seemed a little confused and nervous. Hikari-san. Hikari, who finally seemed to understand what he meant, nodded. "I understand, my quirk is called Void, a black substance that has no shape or volume condenses in me, as if it were a vessel. Because it has no shape, I am the one that generates an image in my head that the void imitates. A limit has not been discovered as to how much void I can generate. It is also speculated that my void quirk could be alive, or be some kind of creature. from what you saw when I did the launch test. Izuku seemed somewhat surprised by the detailed explanation, apart from the fact that he said more than 2 words in a sentence. Hey, so how do you go through solid objects? The girl with yellow horns and pink skin poked her head out of Izuku's shoulder, who immediately blushed at having the girl so close until a part of her question hit him. Go through objects? He asked the girl, losing his sudden embarrassment, focusing his attention on the strange quirk. As I said, I can shape it, mold its structure, and I also said that it has no volume or mass, it weighs what I think it weighs, and it moves as fast as I want. What I did in the admission test was cover my body with void. I returned it to its normal state once it covers me completely, and then it only advances towards the object I want to go through. I can't use it all the time because it would go through the ground I'm stepping on, and it also uses too much energy, that's why you see me jumping every time I use it. The people around who heard that were very surprised. An ability that allows you to attack, defend and evade is something rare, and less with the ease with which Hikari seems to do it. How are you able to change it? There's no limit to what you generate, but how do you manage to exhaust yourself? The raven-haired girl sitting next to her suddenly asked with a sudden interest in the conversation. I constantly waste energy because I have to contain the emptiness inside me, it became something natural in me, so even sleeping I waste energy containing my quirk. If I let it overflow due to exhaustion, the same thing could happen to me as to the ball I threw in the test, only on a larger scale, and it would have no end because it generated a constant vacuum. I am able to go through objects because vacuum does not follow molecular rules, it is a substance that is still being investigated. Only I am not interested in it being made public, so those who investigate it keep it for my benefit. How to contain it and other things are necessary for when the vessel breaks or overflows. Some were confused by that, something that did not follow the molecular rules was undoubtedly non-existent, they are practically universal rules. Although Izuku had another question in his head. How come the vessel breaks? Hikari looked at him and said clearly what that meant. When I die, there's a chance the void will spread from my corpse, and all the accumulated emptiness will explode and consume everything it can. The class shuddered at the thought that he was already considering the possibility of dying, though there were also some like Mineta who were more worried that he wouldn't be around when that happened. Hikari didn't say another word and focused his gaze forward, oblivious to the stares he was receiving from the people near him. Izuku said nothing and went to his seat, staring into space for a moment, and then a determined look appeared, and he went back to writing in his notebook. Mina on the other hand looked at him strangely, then turned around and walked back to her seat. Shoji, who was also listening to the conversation, only in silence, well, he remained silent although he told himself that he would keep an eye on the boy next to him. Momo was a different case, she never considered the possibility that he would die. It wasn't the fact that he would die being a hero or of old age, the fact is that she didn't consider that he would actually die at some point. So when she heard Hikari take precautions even when he's dead, it was something she could actually come to respect. Sure, the thought of dying is depressing, but she said it as if it wouldn't affect her. And something started to grow inside her. Curiosity, maybe it was the same feeling she had when she discovered how her quirk worked, but the fact is that she was curious, how was someone, being so young, to think of their own death as something common? If you look at it from an objective point of view, it's clear that death is present everywhere, it's something natural. But talking about it as if it were nothing was only seen in adults. When they already accept that death is reaching them is when they don't care to talk about it, or it's the opposite too. She continued looking at Hikari for a moment longer, and she thought that it seemed like her face was something that she couldn't explain right now, and it only made her more curious. Chapter 3. When classes ended, Hikari left the classroom and headed for the exit. A few steps away were Izuku and Iida, who began to chat about the UA requirement and other matters. As they approached the exit, Achako joined them, heading for the train station. She went in the opposite direction, walking toward the center because she needed to stock up on groceries. As he walked, a rather elegant limousine passed by him. It was a curious sight. You don't often see those types of vehicles. He continued walking until he reached the city center, where he began searching for the store where he always shopped. Out of the corner of his eye, he found something that caught his eye. It was strange. Nothing recently had caught his attention. He approached the window to get a better look at the object. It was a sketch set with several graphite pencils, a notebook that opened from the bottom up, and some Anchor eyeliner pencils. He briefly checked his wallet, discovering that there was more than enough to buy the set without leaving out Kuro's pantry and food. Putting the set in his backpack, he headed for his convenience store. Inside, he found the same old woman with purple hair and wings. This time she was wearing an apron, and she was arranging some items on her shelves. "Ah, Hikari, nice to see you, the usual." She asked with an amused smile, to which Hikari nodded, seeing no problem. "You know, I was a little surprised that you talked the other time, don't you talk often do you?" He asked still with his smile. Hikari nodded. You should talk more, people won't approach you if you don't talk to them. Hikari was a little confused, did he need people to approach him? He didn't see it as something fundamental or strictly necessary. Why do I need people to approach me? The old woman looked at him, a little astonished, but then smiled warmly. You want to be a hero, don't you? The older woman asked. Hikari nodded. Why? Because I want to protect people. He answered calmly. The old woman looked at him for a moment longer and indicated that he should crouch down in front of her, which of course he did, making the old woman stroke his head between the horns he had. You're a good boy, you shouldn't be a lonely person, if you get hurt there won't be anyone who can help you up, and if you can't get up how will you help people? Or maybe by making friends you will become stronger. The desire to protect along with love obviously are the greatest motivations that a person can have to be a hero. He didn't understand much of what she said. How does making friends make you stronger? What are friends? How does love feel? She said she wanted to protect people, isn't loving the same as desiring? What are friends? How does love feel? Can I love someone? Those questions didn't seem to surprise the old woman who only smiled even more. Friends are those who are with you, who support you, who laugh with you, who support you in difficult times. There will be better friends than others, but you have to value them all equally. And love, there are so many types of love that feel different, but they all have something in common, they make you happy. Loving something is what makes you feel wonderful, like the love of parents for their children, the love of couples. There is also love between friends. The only thing I can tell you is that I hope you realize when you love something or someone, because it hurts when you lose it forever. Hikari seemed to understand a little. She stood up and thanking the explanation and the advice she prepared to finish her shopping, feeling that she knew more and more about people and how feelings work. As she walked towards her home, she wished in the depths of her heart, without even knowing she had one, and without knowing that she wanted it. He prayed that one day he could love and be loved, that one day he could smile like he saw so many people smile, and that he could cry like he saw so many people do. When he got home, he fed Kuro, took off his uniform and put on a more comfortable one, and prepared a simple lunch, because the day had been quite tiring for him. Once he filled his tank, he lay down on his bed, feeling even more exhausted once he entered a state of rest. Kuro wasted no time lying on his stomach begging for caresses, which were lazily given. Hikari thought about what the old woman said, should she try it? The problem was that she didn't know how to do it. Was that why she didn't try it before? She didn't know, maybe it's because she had no interest. Why hadn't she had no interest? Not finding the answer, she decided to take a nap, not being in the mood to watch television. In the dream. Darkness, a black screen that had no end settled, motionless Hikari was floating among all that darkness, completely naked and with his necklace as his only accessory. A huge roar was heard behind him and he turned around instinctively. The black beast, which despite the darkness of the environment, seemed to be even darker, the white silhouette of its mouth with large teeth, 8 wide eyes, bright and sharp, that demonstrated the aggressiveness of a predator, on its head, stood out several horns like his, but more aggressive in appearance. Bringing his skyscraper-sized head closer, he snorted, generating a great wave of invisible wind. Suddenly, the void seemed to squeeze his body, clinging to his limbs, leaving him completely immobile. Contrary to the fear he might have felt, he was amazed, marveled by the gigantic entity in front of him. The creature only watched him for a few seconds that could have been minutes or hours, until Hikari was freed from the void clinging to his limbs. The void began to run through Hikari's body until it completely covered it, giving him an appearance similar to that of the entity in front of him. The necklace, being the only thing that was not consumed, began to violently absorb the void, generating a whirlpool that absorbed everything, including the enormous entity. When it finished absorbing everything, Hikari looked around and saw nothing, only the purest white that could exist. Silence seemed to take over the place. Hikari continued to be confused, looking at the necklace that normally hung around his neck. Suddenly, it seemed to break in half, scaring Hikari, who became worried about the only symbol she had of her parents. Taking the figure in her hands, she cautiously observed a fissure that formed. After nothing else happened, she began to look at the necklace in its entirety. Running her fingers along the lines that made up the figure, she stopped to look at the black orbs. After looking at it for a second, she saw how the black of the orbs moved quickly and almost imperceptibly. Then, black chains emerged from the orbs, covering her body and anchoring themselves somewhere on the infinite white screen. Then, a loud, deep voice came through. The void will be your power, you will be bound to it for all eternity. Find an owner who will give it a purpose, and give it the soul of a monarch. The unbreakable bond will present itself, and will show you a world you do not know. Awaken the heart of emptiness, and proclaim the position you must take as the Lord of the Void. Confused by his words, Hikari tried to ask. But words never left his mouth as the necklace began to float and spin in front of him, freeing itself from his neck. It floated majestically in front of the young albino. Until the void shot out and made its way into his chest, right in the place of his heart. Wake up, pure receptacle, wake up to become the new Hollow Knight. You face the flash that tries to consume the minds of human insects that cannot oppose its light. As he spoke those words, his body seemed to have absorbed all the emptiness, which seemed to contain all that power, to then be released violently, consuming the infinite light and settling the darkness. When it consumed everything, a shadow of himself appeared before him, expressionless, purposeless. It stood before him, its wide orbs fixed on his figure, while Hikari looked on in astonishment, and when he tried to touch it, it copied his same action. When their fingers touched, it seemed to absorb his shadow. End of the dream. Opening his eyes, he found himself face to face with Kuro, licking his face, his rough tongue tickling him, eliciting faint giggles until he shook it off. Looking around, a little dazed, he tried to remember his dream, only to find nothing. His mind couldn't recover his dream. Discarding the idea of remembering, he got up and checked the time. It had only been 2 hours since he fell asleep, so he went to take a bath. When he came out, he looked in the mirror. His eyes fell on his neck, where the necklace hung peacefully. Waiting for something that never came, he noticed its shape. Suddenly, he became a little excited when a crack appeared on the lower half of the amulet. Running his fingers over the crack, he silently promised to be more careful. So his routine continued normally, although after all, it was harder for him to fall asleep due to the nap he had in the afternoon. Another morning began. This time he got up a little later because he had already mechanized the time it took to get to the academy. Once he arrived, he entered normally and went to his classroom. As usual, Kitsuki had his feet on the desk. Iida tried to reprimand him only to be masterfully ignored. He went to his seat, noticing that Kitsuki was looking at him out of the corner of his eye with some anger. Once he sat down, he remembered that he had bought the sketchbook, so he took it out and thought for a bit that he wanted to draw. Remembering his necklace, he took it out of his shirt and still tied around his neck, he began to analyze it and try to copy it. Although he was not an expert in it, he tried hard to make it look the same, although he tried to do it without the crack it had. Without being noticed, Momo arrived at her seat and looked somewhat curiously at the necklace that hung around her neck. The design was strange but elegant, but she was a little hypnotized by the black orb similar to eyes. When he saw the void of the eyes move, he came out of his trance, watching as Hikari drew. It was quite similar, although there were mistakes of course, he was not an expert in the art of drawing. Noticing with grace that the colors resembled Hikari due to the really pale skin tone and her black eyes. It's a very pretty necklace, Momo said, scaring Hikari a little, who looked in her direction, blinking a little, looked at the necklace, and then at Momo. Yes, it's an amulet, Hikari said, surprising Momo a little. Well, she didn't expect him to speak, but she was somewhat happy. Where did you get it? She asked, and Hikari looked into her eyes for a moment, then looked forward. I don't know, it appeared hanging around my neck the day my parents died. Now Momo felt a little bad about that. It wasn't a pleasant thing to remember the death of someone close to her. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't make you feel bad. Hikari looked at her again, her expressionless face gone as she showed slight confusion. Do people usually feel bad about that? Momo now couldn't hide her surprise, although only her expression changed and her posture too, showing the bewilderment that people would show for something like that. Does that mean you don't care? Hikari shook her head. I never felt sad about it. I don't think I ever felt sad about something like that. I didn't know them well, and even now I can't remember their faces. Now Momo felt sorry for him. It's difficult to grow up without the love of a family, although it's strange that she doesn't feel sad about it. Enough time must have passed for her to forget her parents' faces. Before continuing with her talk, the teacher entered, announcing his arrival and demanding silence. The whole class obeyed and sat in their respective places. When the class started, Hikari got a little lost in her thoughts when she looked at the black orbs of her amulet. She looked a little closer and noticed that the void seemed to move inside. That definitely didn't happen before. Being reprimanded by the teacher, since he was distracted, and if it was repeated he would take the necklace from him. Somewhat hastily he put it inside his clothes. Momo saw that, found it somewhat comical that being the expressionless person he was, he got nervous and his face didn't change at all. Shoji looked at that, wondered how important that necklace was to him. From what he saw of him, yesterday he didn't seem to get upset by anything. After that little incident, the class continued normally, although it seemed that Hikari was more distracted than usual. When the break time came, most of his classmates grouped together, talking about classes and how anxious they were for the class that All Might would teach. Hikari silently watched the interaction of his classmates. It was curious to see how with small talks they began to get to know each other better, having already formed groups in the class, of which Hikari did not participate. The boy approached him and greeted him, saying his name was Tokoyami Fumikichi. Your gift is quite similar to mine. He seemed a little excited saying that, but he couldn't be sure because of his bird-like head. Although you only grew horns, my head changed completely, he mentioned calmly. My quirk is dark shadow, it's a part of me, so I can give it orders, although under certain circumstances it can get out of control. When he said the name of his quirk, a creature with the silhouette of the boy's head, dark purple with black touches and completely yellow eyes, came out of a part of his arm. It had claw-shaped hands with 4 pointed fingers. Is it alive? Hikari asked, quite surprised, as he tried to touch dark shadow, who pecked his finger. Sorry about that, he's quite hostile with strangers. Hikari looked at the creature and the boy who controlled it for a moment longer. An image of himself appeared in his head, something similar to dark shadow, and he thought he could do it if he concentrated. As he stretched out his hand, he concentrated on making a figure of himself. It worked, but it wasn't the same as the one he saw in his head. That one seemed to have a consciousness of its own, and the one he created was just a static image, not even having the wide orbs that it had for eyes. Though Koyami was a little surprised by Hikari's control over her quirk. Whoa, amazing, I thought you could only cover objects and your body with it. Hikari moved the figure towards Dark Shadow, who with a swipe of his paw, destroyed the figure, returning it to his hand. I can mold it, but I need to concentrate a lot. He answered with his usual expressionless face. Although I'm not sure if it's alive or not. Though Koyami looked at him for a moment. I think they're still investigating. I'm supposed to send a sample of the void to a specialized laboratory. They would be able to discover everything possible about it. Just as Tokoyami answered, the bell for the end of the break ended. Thanking him for the small talk, he went to his place as he sat down. Some continued talking, but from their seats. I'm here, entering through the door like someone normal. Hikari thought it was normal in fact, announcing her entrance in that way was somewhat extravagant, but there were people who due to their quirks, tend to be louder people. A clear example of this was Katsuki, who instead of shouting that he only does it when someone bothers him, his steps, way of walking, the way he moves everything in his path was quite noisy in itself. His classmates began to murmur about the silver ear suit he had on top of him, about how he would teach them classes, and that he was in fact All Might, the great and praised symbol of peace. The hero preparation class is designed to build your heroic foundations through several rehearsals. Some were more focused on the way All Might highlighted his figure and muscles, some really paid attention to what he was saying. Izuku and surprisingly Katsuki are one of them, of course, without leaving aside the protagonist who was also attentive to his words. We will start immediately, with the fight rehearsal. Katsuki was starting to get excited, unconsciously generating small explosive flashes in his palms. Izuku on the other hand, was a little excited with the idea of fighting, however he was more worried about the fact that he can't control his quirk. Hikari on the other hand was thinking about what she would make for dinner. Of course the class mattered, but she didn't take too much importance to the fights. On the other hand, living alone, and all the responsibility that entails really makes her think things like that often. And to start your first battles. We have prepared the costumes that you sent in your application taking into consideration your quirks. All Might mentioned this time calmer, although strangely he gave off the same energy. Our hero suits, amazing. The boy with spiky red hair and sharp teeth shouted excitedly. Go change and then we'll go. Meet in the beta courtyards. All Might said and then ran out of the room. Some were somewhat stunned, but followed his orders. Once in the locker rooms, the girls and boys went to their respective designated places to avoid conflicts and misunderstandings. With the men. They were so excited that they changed very quickly, although before that, some were joking and talking about who had more muscles and such. Shoji in particular was surprised at how small and thin Hikari looked without his large uniform. Of course the fact that Shoji is almost 2 times taller also influenced. Hikari-san, do you usually exercise? Shoji asked. He couldn't call him by his last name because he didn't have one, so to avoid disrespect, he added the san. He heard Izuku do it, so he thought it would be no problem, which was true. Not really, I'm busier because I live alone, although I think I could, maybe it's because I'm used to my usual routine. Shoji wasn't too surprised, although it is true that it is a surprising fact that a person being so young is practically independent. Don't you have problems with money? Hikari had to raise her head to get a better look at Shoji. No, the government provides me with enough money to pay the rent and to buy the necessary things. Since I am alone, sometimes I have some money left over that I save. That certainly calmed Shoji's conscience. Aren't your clothes a bit big for you? Hikari looked at her uniform and then at her body, then she looked at Shoji. Not really, it's comfortable, besides I don't go shopping for clothes that often so I'm not familiar with the sizes yet. Shoji nodded as he finished putting on his suit. He looked again at Hikari to see him put on a kind of red cape that covered even the front, long enough to cover his thighs, with a high collar that covered his mouth. Then he looked at his black pants and high boots, a very dark blue color. I watched Hikari take out a white mask that covered her face completely, giving it a round appearance, because it didn't highlight her nose or mouth. The only thing it had were holes where the eyes were located, with a black fabric that covered them. Under the cape he had a black long-sleeved shirt that was tight. It was somewhat surprising because he was supposed to like loose clothing. He also had black gloves that were perfectly attached to his hands. Finally he noticed some kind of weapon hanging from the back of his back. It looked like a sword, but it had a round and sharp appearance at the tip. The strangest thing was the ring that it had at the end of the handle. It should be noted that the entire weapon was made of metal, due to the silver and polished appearance. According to Shoji, it was an extra large XXL size needle. Once they all gathered in the beta courtyards, although Izuku was not seen, who arrived somewhat late. Don't forget, from now on, you are all officially heroes. Everyone showed excited expressions. It was to be expected because the one who was recognizing them as heroes was the symbol of peace himself. Very well. Let's see what you are made of, boys. It's time for battle rehearsal. Some cheered with excitement, while others began to show off their outfits and chat about them while they waited for the exercise to be explained. This was the case for Izuku, who was chatting animatedly with Ochako, who praised him for his outfit. However, Izuku did the same, looking extremely embarrassed by it. Tokoyami approached the young albino and pointed out how similar their outfits were, although Hikari's was more striking because of the red cape instead of the black one Tokoyami's had. "And that?" he asked, quite curious, as he looked at the needle in his back. "It's a sting." He was a little taken aback by the brief answer, but before he could inquire further, he was interrupted. "Sensei. Regarding the stage we're going to use, is it the city simulation from the entrance exam?" Iida spoke, who was recognized by Izuku. He didn't recognize him because Iida changed pretty quickly and Izuku was concentrating on his own suit. "You see, in fact this is an indoor battle rehearsal. The neutralization of villains is usually seen outdoors, but statistically most of them are indoors. Most acts of villainy are committed indoors. Some were aware of it, such as Momo Yaoi Rozu and Shoto Todoroki, who come from powerful families both economically and socially, due to some famous hero. Imprisonment, house arrest, the black market. In this society saturated with heroes, any intelligent villain lurks from the shadows. For this test you will be separated into groups of villains and heroes. For a 2-on-2 team battle. What about formation training? Kiro. Asked a girl with green hair and a frog-like appearance in a tight green suit. This is the formation training. Only this time there won't be any robot that you could just destroy. Mentioned All Might while holding his closed fist at face level. So how will we determine who wins and who loses? Asked Momo, hoping to gain information to plan her victory. Is it okay if we just kill them? Asked Katsuki with an aura that threatened to do harm. Is there an expulsion penalty like with Izawa-sensei's exercises? Asked Ochako, quite worried. It was to be expected when in your first minutes of class they threaten you with expulsion. If we are going to split into groups, what would be the best way to do it? Iida asked while raising his arm. Doesn't this cape look shiny on me? Yuga Aoyama asked while glittering on his body. Hikari was curious as to how it was possible for a person to get glitter like that. I can't answer when you ask me so many questions. All Might said while trembling a little due to the pressure that being a teacher put on him while he pulled out a script from a hole in the artwork. For this training, we have some villains guarding a nuclear weapon that they are trying to detonate. The heroes must stop them and their nefarious plan before it's too late. Most of the class thought that sounded like stories from the golden age of superheroes. If the villains manage to keep the nuclear weapon the whole time, or if they capture the heroes, they win. Their teammates and enemies will be chosen at random. All Might read as he took out a box containing the names of the students. Iida seemed to question his way of creating the teams until Izuku explained to him that professional heroes are forced to work with strangers, so it is done to make them better adaptable to all situations. And so the teams were organized. All Might drew 2 names at random from the box and assigned them a letter to make it easier to organize the fights. Teams. Izuku Midoriya Ochako Uraraka. The Shoto Todoroki Shoji Mizo. Si Momo Yaoi Rozu Mineta Minoru. The Katsuki Bakugu Iida Tenya. The Mina Shito Yuga Aoyama. F Koji Kota Hikari. The Jiro Kyoka Kaminari Denki. H Yumikage Tokoyami Asu Issei. Iajiro Mashiro Toru Hagakure. De Siro Hanta Kirishima Jiro. Once the groups were designated, All Might showed 2 boxes that had hero and villain written on them respectively. Ochako celebrated that she was paired with Izuku, making a joke about fate as us connected, while Izuku struggled internally to find a word to say to her. And the pairs for the first fight will be next. Said All Might while looking for a ball that had a letter of the teams that would be chosen, generating a lot of expectation in his students. Team A, they will be heroes. Team D will be villains. Well, maybe that was destiny, thought Hikari as she watched Izuku and Katsuki avoid looking at each other, Katsuki wanting the fight to start and Izuku thinking about his chances of winning against his childhood friend. Once the teams were taken to the simulation area, All Might led the class to the monitoring room. Indoor battle rehearsal begins. Now observe and meditate on your own strategies. Hikari and her classmates watched as Katsuki suddenly ran from his position, leaving Iida alone, while Izuku and Ichako infiltrated through a window thanks to the girl's zero-gravity quirk. They tried to advance stealthily through the hallways until Katsuki suddenly appeared around a corner and delivered an explosive blow that hit the wall, but grazed and destroyed part of Izuku's suit, revealing part of his face. "The surprise attack!" exclaimed a short boy with spheres on his head. Hikari thought he was called Mineta Minoru. "That Bakugo is a cheater. Ambushes are unbeautiful for a man." Hiroshima shouted, being advised by All Might to mention that attacking suddenly was a valid point if it came to acting like a villain. Before they continued commenting, they saw how Katsuki tried to use a right hook, being anticipated by Izuku, who took his arm and, using a judo technique, used Katsuki's weight to impact his back strongly against the ground. After Katsuki slowly began to get up due to the impact, they had a small dialogue that they couldn't hear. "What are you saying? There's no sound through the surveillance cameras." Hiroshima mentioned, somewhat confused while looking at the whole scene. "Teammates can communicate through wireless transmitters. Plus they all have a map of the building. And we have this capture tape," All Might said while showing the aforementioned tape between his fingers. "When someone has wrapped their opponent with this, it is a sign that they have been captured." Hikari thought that maybe he could avoid being captured if he became intangible before being completely wrapped, so he saved that idea for later. The heroes have a 15-minute limit to find and deactivate the bomb. The heroes have a huge disadvantage in this situation. The girl with pink skin and yellow horns mentioned, somewhat confused. "That's how it should be, it's usually the villains who plan this because of the same thing, because it generates a huge disadvantage, they have to learn to face these types of situations," she said before her attention was stolen by the fight that was taking place. The conversations couldn't be heard, so they could only see how Katsuki violently lunged when Izuku tried to speak. Ichako left the place surely on Izuku's orders. Izuku attempted to use the capture tape only to be hit by an explosion that knocked him a few feet away. Once he was quite far away, he stopped for a moment before starting to run down a hallway to his left. Katsuki seemed to get angrier and furiously started looking for Izuku. Meanwhile, Ichako had found the location of the bomb, but for some strange reason that they couldn't understand because they couldn't hear anything, Ichako burst out laughing and, for obvious reasons, gave away her position. Iida seemed to be bragging about something as he held his arms out, sweeping his attention around the room, and judging by the way his chest was moving, he was laughing. Ichako seemed to speak into the communicator again. Izuku listened and answered what Ichako was saying just before Katsuki found him, and they started a small fight. Suddenly Katsuki stepped away and started talking. He held out his arm and placed one of his fingers on a safety pin that looked like decoration on his grenade gloves. "Young Bakugo, stop, he'll kill you." Although he tried, Katsuki responded to his warning and subsequently unleashed the safety lock and spread a huge explosion that destroyed part of the building, which luckily could not affect Izuku because he dodged the attack. "Sensei, please stop this. That boy Bakugo is crazy. At this rate he's going to kill him." Hiroshima shouted, this time more worried and alarmed as he tried to save Izuku from death at the hands of a crazy explosive boy. "No." All Might said a little hesitantly, although most would think it was because of the fight. In reality, no one knew why the symbol of peace would be so hesitant in reality. Taking the microphone once again. "Young Bakugo, if you throw another explosion like that, this exercise will end forcibly and your team will be disqualified," he said to calm Katsuki down a bit while he continued explaining how stupid it would be for both sides to create destruction like that if the objective of being a villain was to defend an objective. Katsuki threw a brief tantrum and then launched himself at Izuku again, who thought about counterattacking only for his explosions to change their trajectory and hit Izuku in the back with another explosion, while with his other hand, he kept his balance with another stronger explosion. Todoroki looked somewhat impressed. He tricked his opponent and used his explosion ability to redirect the trajectory to his convenience. "I didn't think he was that smart, seeing how he behaves, that was subtly skillful." He finished his observation while watching Katsuki's actions. Controlling a powerful blow while resisting inertia at the same time means he should be able to fine-tune the power of his blasts. Momoyae Rozu added as she looked at the scene analytically. "I can't say I like him, but the guy's got talent, he's got talent," Kaminari said, wishing he wasn't on the receiving end of Katsuki's wrath. Katsuki slammed his forearm grenades into Izuku's shoulder, causing Izuku to cry out in pain as he was dragged across the floor. A small tumult broke out in the observation room, with people arguing over whether Katsuki might have actually tied Izuku up and the matter would be settled, but he decided to keep hurting him or over Katsuki's hero sense and also the advantage Izuku seemed to have at the beginning of the battle. Izuku, in an attempt to flee, ran into another wall and had to face Katsuki again. They had a small exchange before their anger erupted and they lunged at each other. Man, Bakugo really won't let him go, huh? He said to himself as he watched Izuku and Kitsuki approach to start a battle again. Seeing what would happen, Kirishima tried to get All Might to stop the fight. Attention both teams, the match is suspended. All Might tried to say only for a huge explosion generated by Izuku's power to burn a hole upwards in the building, while with his other arm, he stopped the huge explosion that Kitsuki provided him. Apparently it was all part of Izuku's plan because Ichako, taking advantage of the explosion, grabbed a pillar while removing gravity and used it as a bat to hit debris and send it to Iida, who could do nothing but dodge until he realized that Ichako had gotten too close to the weapon and without being able to do anything, Ichako hugged the weapon while showing a victorious smile. The heroes, the team of heroes wins. All Might finally announced as he came out of his daze. Kitsuki was stunned as he kept his gaze lost and surprised. All Might suddenly appeared at his side as he guided him to the monitoring room, meanwhile some small transport robots took Izuku to the infirmary. Once they arrived, All Might mentioned that he was going to highlight the person who did the best during rehearsal. The best one was certainly young Iida, of course. Iida expressed his confusion, Kitsuki kept his gaze lowered, and Ichako seemed to be somewhat frustrated. But weren't Ichako and Midoriya the winners? Kiro mentioned the frog-like girl, somewhat confused by the situation. I wonder why I would possibly think that. Does anyone know why? She said, though only two people raised their hands, one of them being Momoyae Rozu and the other being the young albino protagonist who I briefly left out. Let's give young Hikari the chance to express his point of view. She said, though Momo seemed a little disappointed that she wasn't chosen, she understood that unlike her who expressed her opinion at several points of the fight, Hikari hadn't said or done anything but watched. Sorry for taking away your chance. Hikari said politely while bowing slightly to Momo, who accepted somewhat resignedly. Well, starting from the beginning, the infiltration of the team of heroes was quite successful. They knew how to take advantage of Uraraka-san's quirk quite well. Kitsuki refused to participate as a team and went directly into combat, guided by a personal reason. He only focused on Izuku, Uraraka-san, although she could have gotten quite close to the position of the bomb, a rather strange carelessness made her give away her position. Kitsuki and Izuku, although they showed a quite outstanding level in combat, they ended up losing their way, and Kitsuki generated an attack that destroyed part of the building. Although you had already mentioned it, the same thing happened at the end of the encounter. Due to the risky plan carried out by the team of heroes, Tenya-san on the other hand, remained firm and did not underestimate his enemy at all times, taking previous precautions and acting accordingly. He looked for the best way to protect the bomb, even when he did not have Kitsuki's support. He said, obtaining quite varied reactions. Uraraka on the one hand only looked a little frustrated, not so much due to that Hikari knew how to explain quite well without offending anyone, and also showing her flaws. Kitsuki remained silent and in the same position. Iida looked like he was about to cry. Some of his classmates looked at him surprised that they heard him speak, and others were more surprised by the extensive explanation. Shoji thought that despite his expression and acting he could be quite intelligent. Tokoyami thought the same. Momo again couldn't help but feel curious. Of course she could have explained that in more detail, but she is usually harsher when it comes to criticizing her flaws and those of others. All Might was satisfied, grateful that he didn't have to give such a long explanation. Good answer, although it wasn't perfect because young Tenya was quite stiff during the rehearsal. After that the fights continued. The second of them was between Team B formed by Todoroki and Shoji being heroes, and Team I formed by Hagakure Toru and Ajiro Mashirao. It was a pretty short fight considering that Todoroki simply froze the entire building and touched the bomb without much trouble, and then melted it as if it were nothing. The third fight was between Team H as heroes and Team J as villains. Team H emerged victorious. The fourth fight was between Team G as heroes and Team E as villains. Team E emerged victorious. And the last fight, the most anticipated not by the characters, but by you heroic readers. The fifth fight was between Team F as heroes and Team C as villains. An. Important, please read this, since the other fights are not specified. I use parts of the manga to guide me a bit. I did not write the other fights, and I only dictated the winner based on their quirk, personalities, teamwork and so on. I will only do the one of the super protagonist detailed because otherwise there would be no development. I also want you to know that I am not up to date with the manga. I only remember up to the attack of the League of Villains to the camp and nothing else, and I only know it because I based it on other fanfics, so if you see any problems just send a comment and I will read them. When they announced their team, Hikari began to walk next to her partner who seemed a little scared of her presence. Once they arrived at the field, she explained the rules in detail, gave them the map of the building and the communicators, then left giving them 5 minutes that the villains took advantage of to discuss the location of the bomb. Hikari looked at Koji. Koji Koda, right. He just nodded. Hikari looked at the building for a moment. I think it's necessary to know your quirk in detail. I can devise a strategy while we infiltrate. Koji looked at him for a moment and began to move his hands, sign language. The problem is that Hikari doesn't know sign language, so he let him know while apologizing. My gift. It allows me to give orders to animals, including insects. I don't think it'll be very useful. He explained briefly. Hikari looked at him and began to think. Bring as many animals as you can right now, we'll use the small ones to track the bomb, the bigger ones we'll use as support during the fight. Koji seemed to tremble a little. Do we have to fight? Hikari looked at him, analyzing his behavior. I understand, then you and the animals will be my support, my quirk is void, there really are few things I can't do with it, so I'll protect you while we find a better strategy. Koji seemed to brighten, while showing her a gentle smile. We have to be careful, Yayoi Rozu-san is very smart, she's probably finding a difficult position, we don't know what they're thinking, but we'll try to win. Koji seemed motivated as he stood next to him, he looked at Hikari for a moment, he was actually scared of him, because his mask made him look like an insect, he's terrified of insects. Indoor combat rehearsal begins. All Might said through the communicator. Hikari looked at Koda for a moment and looked at the second floor. Hold on, we'll jump. Koji looked confused, but he didn't have time when Hikari grabbed him by the back of his suit and threw him into the air, jumping after him, she covered her body in vacuum and generated the wings she used in the entrance exam, and with one of the whips that came out of her body, she took Koji back into the air and entered through the first window. Once inside, the vacuum entered Hikari's body again and looked at how Koji was, he was really scared. Sorry, we don't have much time. Koji nodded weakly as he stood up. We'll look for them now. Hikari said as she began to walk calmly. Don't you think they'll attack us? Koji said following Hikari's steps as he looked from side to side with the map in his hand. Actually no, the villain's objective is to protect the bomb, it is completely illogical for them to place the bomb on the first floor, unless if Yayoi Rozu-san is the one making the plan, they can't because their gifts are not offensive, from what I saw, Mineta-san can take out spheres that stick to surfaces, it is something complicated, so be careful. On the other hand, Yayoi Rozu-san has a quirk that greatly expands the possibilities, she can create objects. I don't know how and I don't know if it has a limit, so you have to be attentive. Koji felt a little surprised. Well, Koda-san, I think it's time you call the animals. Koji looked at him and mentioned that he would need to shout for that. It's not relevant, anyway they can't move the bomb, and if we are far away they won't know where the sound is coming from. Koji nodded and shouted as loud as he could, some animals, the smallest ones like mice and birds approached him. I don't think there's any more, if we're not in an area with several animals I don't think it'll be much help. Hikari looked at the small army of mice and birds. There are enough, the bomb is made of paper match, according to All Might Sensei, so with these birds, it's more than enough to lift it. Koji looked at his birds and then smiled, accepting the plan. They began to search with the mice for the bomb area. He was on the 4th floor according to Koda when a mouse approached him. We're here, I'll be the distraction, you make sure the birds start bothering the villains to make it easier, if you see an opportunity, take advantage of it. Koda nodded and stayed behind. Hikari ran to the door and kicked it open while pulling the stinger from his back and preparing to attack. He barely reacted when a rubber bullet hit his chest. That's a bit careless of you, hero. Momo yelled at him from her position behind a pillar. At the moment I couldn't see Mineta. Hikari didn't speak and started running in a zigzag pattern, avoiding easy targets, but was caught off guard when a flashbang grenade landed in front of him, completely blinding him. While he wasn't looking, he was hit by 2 metal rods in his back and abdomen. Before continuing, Momo tried to cover Hikari with the capture tape. Hikari, who had already recovered his vision but not his hearing, watched Momo approach him with the tape while Mineta continued hitting him. He quickly covered his body with the void. Mineta got scared so he stopped hitting him. Momo, who seemed to know what he was trying to do, accelerated towards him. Jumping a little, he propelled himself with the void towards Momo, who barely reacted when she was pierced through his body. Once on the other side, the void moved to his arms. He wasn't noticed by the black clothes under the red cloak. He quickly swung the stinger, hitting Momo in the lower back. He ran towards Mineta, who tried in vain to hit him with the metal staff he had in his hands. But the slash from the stinger, the staff shot out of his hands, before it could hit him a rubber bullet hit his arm and side, bending a little in pain. Momo took advantage of that and grabbed a staff that Mineta dropped and tried to hit him, only to be intercepted by Hikari's stinger who tried to counterattack. Momo jumped back and moved away. Mineta watched as Koda tried to get close to the bomb and ran towards him with his spheres in his hands. Koda called his birds who began to attack Mineta who defended himself with the spheres, sticking his birds to the ground or wall. Hikari looked at the battle out of the corner of her eye and believed that he would be okay. She turned her attention to Momo, only to be greeted by an attack from Momo's metal staff that was intercepted by the stinger. "You shouldn't get distracted by your opponent in front of you," she said mockingly, acting like a villain as she tried to push Hikari's weapon away, but she was surprised that despite being taller than him, she was pushed back by the force he exerted. She took a step back and stumbled, falling on her back, but not before dragging Hikari with her. Well, apparently I'm a guy who likes cliches, not really, not that much, but I found it funny XD. If you don't like it, let me know calmly. It was quite a funny scene, not only for his partner Kota, but for everyone else in the monitoring room. Some started to laugh, others didn't react in the least, and some commented that the scene was something of a cliché from a romance series. For Momo it was really embarrassing because Hikari's head reached the height of his chest, being buried in them. Mineta was one of the only cases in which she got angry, almost at the level of Katsuki, when he saw how lucky Hikari was to crash her face into the magumbos of the smartest girl in the class. "I'm sorry," Hikari said as she placed her hands on the ground and stood up. She observed Mono's blushing face that reddened more when she found Hikari looking at her embarrassed face, wishing the earth would treat her at that moment. Dumping back, Hikari got back up and prepared a fighting stance. Momo couldn't concentrate properly due to embarrassment. So in a small act of carelessness she attacked Hikari with her gun, with rubber bullets. Hikari took her stinger as a spear and covered herself with a pillar. The void formed a thread that connected the ring of the stinger and was ready to launch it. The moment came when Momo had to reload the weapon, and that was when she attacked. Throwing the stinger with the void guiding its path, it spun around Momo and the strand of void wrapped around her arms, immobilizing her. Hikari started to approach only to be stopped by Mineta, who had spheres in his hands, despite the fact that he was literally bleeding. Hikari looked where Kota was only to find him surrounded by spheres and was embarrassed for being defeated by an angry dwarf pervert because he wanted to be the one to bury his head in Momo's magumbos. "Uncle!" he shouted angrily, still with the spheres in his hands. Hikari, thinking that he was wasting too much time, took his stinger and wrapping it in void, hit Mineta's head with all his might, which sent it flying and embedded itself in the wall. "I think I went too far," the young albino muttered as he walked up to the bomb and touched it with the palm of his hand. The heroes win. Chapter 4. IV. The heroes win. When the warning was made, the void that held Momo disappeared, leaving her free again and dropping the stinger. Hikari went to see how Mineta was, carefully, and with the help of her quirk, she slowly pulled Mineta off the wall. Then she went to see Koji, still with Mineta in tow, supported by his quirk. "Are you okay?" she asked, and Kota nodded. He had only been captured. He apologized for not being of help. "Don't worry about it." Accepting her apology, she freed Kota, destroying the spheres with her quirk. Then she went to where Momo was holding her weapon. "It's a very peculiar weapon, but I see that you are comfortable with it." She tried to start a conversation avoiding the subject of the accident, which would obviously embarrass her more than she already is. Hikari just nodded and took the weapon, hanging it on her back as she began to walk with Kota and Momo towards the exit, where mini transfer robots were waiting for them to take Mineta to the infirmary. They walked back to the monitoring room where All Might was waiting, who informed them that the best participant were two, Momo and Hikari, who expected a similar type of result because they were both the leaders of their teams and planned all the strategies that were implemented. After that, classes continued normally. The subjects were not too complicated. Instead, Hikari was thinking about a way to implement a fighting style with the stinger, and that would also allow the use of her quirk. She should investigate, but she couldn't do it due to her lack of resources. An idea crossed her mind. Izuku Midoriya, he is obviously an analytical person from what he saw in the fight with Katsuki. The attacks he made against Katsuki at the beginning of the fight were clearly martial arts. Assuming that he investigated the style he uses, it could help him find his own style. I had a vague idea of that, but I couldn't find a specific way to put it into practice. After the bell rang for the end of classes, Izuku came in somewhat sleepy and with his arms bandaged and the right one with a support to prevent it from moving much. "Hey Midoriya. Good work back there." Kirishima greeted animatedly as he approached with Mina Ishido. "Well, I really couldn't hear anything they said. But that was a passionate fight, old man. You dodged like a champion. That first match was so intense that it thrilled us all." They expressed their opinion as they introduced themselves alongside the frog girl who joined the conversation. And where's Kaken?" He left a little while ago. He didn't want to be in the review about the exercise," Kirishima said, to which Izuku ran off, leaving his teammates confused. Hikari, on the other hand, wanted to talk to him, so she ran after him, which wasn't noticed by anyone. "I got this quirk from someone else." Well, that honestly couldn't have been expected. She caught up with him just as he said those words. Izuku continued talking about how he couldn't control it and that he had tried to win without using his quirk. He gave a little speech about how that quirk would become his own power and so on. Obviously Katsuki started with a small tantrum that ended when, with his eyes crystallized by the tears that threatened to come out, he proclaimed that he would be number one. As Katsuki was leaving, All Might ran past Hikari and Izuku and stopped Katsuki and tried to give him his support, only to be masterfully rejected. Once Katsuki left, he turned his attention to Izuku. "Ah, young Midoriya, what were you talking about?" "About Izuku being given a quirk," Hikari replied. "Huh?" Izuku's eyes widened as he looked at the young albino behind him. Hikari, on the other hand, was relaxed. All Might looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Why, you heard everything?" Izuku's brain stopped when he realized his mistake. All Might was drenched in sweat as he realized how little time he had left and the dilemma that was in front of him. "Young Midoriya, did you tell young Katsuki about?" Izuku looked alarmed. No, I didn't tell him that I received one for all from you." "One for all? All Might gave it to you?" All Might facepalmed and Izuku wanted to be swallowed by the earth at that moment. Hikari looked on in confusion as All Might berated Izuku for being so careless and breaking his promise not to tell anyone. "Ah, right, Izuku wanted to ask you for help with something." He expressed his reason to Izuku and All Might, who looked at Hikari in confusion, who was standing there without even flinching at the information he received. Don't you want to know about?" Hikari tilted his head, confused by All Might's question. "By the way, it must be really important that you don't want to tell anyone, so I guess it's none of my business," Hikari mentioned calmly. Izuku and All Might, on the other hand, seemed to deflate, especially All Might, who now looked like a skeleton with skin and hair, wearing a suit that was too big for him. "That's a relief, oh no," he had said before realizing that he was out of time. Never mind, young Midoriya, I'm busy right now, so could you explain the whole situation to him?" All Might said as he began to walk slowly inside the academy. Izuku looked at All Might's retreating form and then looked at Hikari, who was looking at All Might the same. "Hikari-san, you wanted to ask me for help with something, right?" He tried to divert his attention, and he succeeded even though it wasn't necessary because he already knew practically everything. "Yes, I really wanted you to help me with a fighting style," Hikari mentioned as he stood next to Izuku, who looked at him a little confused. "I think that with your quirk it's not necessary to have one." It was normal to think that with a quirk with as many applications as Hikari's, it was understandable that she would trust it quite a bit. "I think it's best to avoid depending on it, after all quirks are useless for some things." Izuku thought about that for a minute. "Okay, I guess I can help you." An idea crossed Izuku's mind. It was something embarrassing to say, but he had never had a friend. I guess you could come to my house." Hikari thought about it for a second. Obviously he could go without any problem, but he didn't know how long it would take and he had to feed Kuro. "Could I make a stop before going?" "Oh sure." Izuku didn't know if that meant yes, but he was quite happy that she didn't reject him. The green-haired man was also curious about Hikari. People with quirks as impressive as his become arrogant. A clear example of this is Katsuki. Hikari and Izuku walked for a while until they entered an apartment complex, not that far from UA. On the way, Izuku told him everything about how he got one for all, how All Might's health was and why he is deflating. Hikari just listened and nodded at the end as she understood the whole situation. She also mentioned that she wouldn't tell anyone. Hikari went up the stairs and Izuku followed closely behind. The young albino stood in front of a door and took out some keys that he used to open it. "You can come in if you want," Hikari said calmly as she left her things next to the door. Izuku, overcome with curiosity, entered the young albino's home. "Excuse me," Izuku said respectfully. He entered and watched as Hikari headed to the living room, which he assumed was the kitchen due to the utensils and other things that were there. A meow was heard at his feet and he looked down to see a black cat with blue eyes, which seemed to be staring at him. "Kuro, come eat," Hikari ordered, and the cat immediately approached and rubbed against Hikari's leg before turning his attention to the plate with his food. "How long have you lived alone?" Hikari looked at him for a second and then turned his attention to his cat. "Since I was 12 years old, that's the age at which orphanages leave their children in the care of the government. They gave me this apartment and a monthly allowance to support myself," he mentioned calmly as he watched Kuro finish his food and rub himself against his leg again. "Okay, that was all, we can go," he said as he put away the plate and the cat's food and then headed for the exit. Izuku in front of him petted Kuro before leaving as a sign of farewell, and they left again. They had to take the subway at Izuku's request because of how far away his house was. During the trip, Izuku called his mother, saying that a friend would be coming to visit. His mother practically had a heart attack when she heard that, but she was skillfully calmed down by Izuku before cutting the call. "So we're friends?" That was when Izuku also had an attack. When he heard that from Hikari, he started talking about how they didn't have to be if he didn't want to and other things that Hikari honestly didn't hear. So we're not friends. Now Izuku noticed Hikari a little and saw how he seemed to be confused and didn't know why he thought he was sad. He realized that he had to be a little more direct. I guess so, only if you want he. Izuku finally said, who was quite nervous. Of course it's not like he's the most social person and Hikari isn't either, which complicated things. So we're friends. Hikari finally said. She seemed a little happy, maybe because she never had a friend or that she started to take grandma's advice into account. Now that he thought about it, he didn't know her name. Help moment XD, I need a name because I can't think of one. When they got off the subway, Izuku led the way to his house, which wasn't that far from the station. When Izuku entered, he heard him say, I'm home. He had never said that before, maybe because there was no one waiting for him. Oh, and Izuku, how good to have you here. I suppose you're his friend, right? Said a short, slightly plump woman, who seemed quite pleasant if it weren't for the fact that she was trembling when she spoke. What Inko Midoriya saw was a boy who was quite white and had a rather delicate face. She looked at his horns for a moment and then looked at his eyes. She was a little scared when she didn't see the brightness that usually lived in people's eyes, the brightness that represented a person's emotion. It wasn't there, or well, there was so little of it that she couldn't see it. Izuku looked at Hikari and he seemed to understand what she meant. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Midoriya. My name is Hikari. It's a pleasure to meet you. She said, bowing respectfully, which left a pretty good impression on Izuku's mother, who still didn't let go of her nervousness when it came to introducing herself. Nice to meet you, my name is Inko Midoriya, I hope you treat Izuku well. She said, bowing as well. Hikari just nodded and they were guided by Inko to the dining room, which was quite clean and quite spacious from Hikari's perspective. She also noticed how warm it seemed inside compared to her home, which was quite cold. Excuse me, but I don't know your last name. Inko said calmer. Izuku looked like a bundle of nerves when he heard the question. I don't have a last name, I'm an orphan. Hikari declared, which didn't seem to matter much to her. For Inko on the other hand, she seemed to want to cry. She definitely didn't believe that a child his age had to raise himself. Obviously she was aware of the age law that orphanages established a few years ago, but still she had never known a case like that. Excuse me, I didn't mean to be so rude. She began to apologize even more to him, which seemed quite exaggerated, but Hikari didn't seem to care too much as she smoothly accepted the apology. Announcing that she would bring them snacks, she went to the kitchen with a handkerchief that she used to dry a few tears that escaped. Sorry about that. Izuku said, somewhat embarrassed by his mother's attitude. Hikari didn't seem to understand why she was apologizing. Why? Izuku, not really having the answer, shook his head and said they would start investigating. While Izuku helped him, Hikari also began an investigation of her own on mother-son behavior, watching how they talked from time to time. In one of those conversations, Inko stroked his head, seeing how he tried hard to follow his dream and help others like he was doing with Hikari. Hikari seemed interested by the display of affection and tried to find out how it felt by placing his left hand on his head and shaking it briefly. Inko and Izuku watched what he did. Izuku didn't understand why he did it, but Inko understood perfectly why he didn't understand displays of affection. Walking near the seat where Hikari was sitting, Hikari watched as she approached him and the warm and understanding smile that was on his face. The hand was placed on his head, between his horns and on his hair. When she began to caress his head, his eyes shone. It was warm, like the feeling he had when his parents protected him. The hand of a mother that caresses with so much love and warmth that he couldn't stop his eyes from starting to shed tears. What is this? Water. Hikari said as she felt her vision crystallize. She placed a hand on her cheek while following the path of water that came out of her eyes. She tried to stop it with her hand and with her sleeves. She tried to make her tears stop. She couldn't do it, even with the woman's hand caressing her head. She felt a lump form in her throat that prevented her from speaking properly. The woman's arm surrounded her head and placed it on her chest, a hug that a mother would give. Inko knew why she was crying. The feeling of not having someone to depend on, living a life where the love of the family shapes you as a person, made a person grow up with a lack of understanding of feelings that are there but are not being released. Okay, here I am. Said the woman, who heard the sobs of the young teenager who only held his head on her chest, his arms trembling with the need to hold on to something. Hikari was a mess right now. He was never hugged, his head was never stroked, no words of support were said. He just stood there watching other families be happy, and he didn't understand how to do it when the people who are supposed to teach you those values were 6 feet under. How to do it when all you felt was the emptiness of not having anyone to lean on to be able to express what you feel. A few minutes passed there. Izuku seemed to understand what he felt when he watched as her eyes shone, the tears that Izuku couldn't understand. He obviously didn't understand the feeling. Of course Izuku was only raised by his mother, for him his mother was his mother-father, so he never felt like he was really alone. Even when he thought his dream was impossible, his mother was always there. Seeing Hikari of all people break down just for a hug she never received was quite shocking. His thoughts were divided between supporting Hikari in everything he could and being thankful that he had a mother to trust. Hikari finally seemed to calm down as he slowly pulled out of the hug and looked at the woman in front of him. He saw how wet her apron was from the tears she had shed. Sorry, I wet your apron." For the first time in his life, he stuttered, his throat feeling a little odd at having let out so much emotion in such a moment. Inko just shook her head and gently cupped Hikari's face, which was a mess with traces of dried tears and her eyes slightly red and swollen from irritation. "Calm down. I hope you feel better. It's no good holding in your feelings like that," she said as she used her thumb to wipe away a stray tear that remained near her long eyelashes. "Even if you told me that, I don't know what I was feeling right now." Hikari answered honestly while wiping her face with her sleeve. She asked if she could use the bathroom, to which Inko gave its location inside the house, and Hikari went there to wash her face. Mom, why were you crying?" Inko looked at him with a melancholy face. The person who grows up without the love they deserve tends to not understand human emotions. A child who grew up without parents does not know what it is like to feel their affection. A hug is enough to move their heart provided with love. Izuku, somewhat surprised by his mother's wise attitude, he watched as Hikari came down with a more relaxed face than her usual expressionless face, apologizing again for the inconvenience. They focused again with Izuku on finding a suitable fighting style. "I think maybe you should focus on your speed, since your quirk doesn't allow you to maintain a constant movement speed, being fast, and how you use your power to exponentially increase your strength would make it difficult to dodge." Hikari nodded, quite satisfied by the conclusion the green-haired man came to. The question suddenly arose in the albino's head. "Why do you hurt yourself when using your power?" Izuku looked at his mother for a moment, who luckily was distracted, before answering the albino that he doesn't completely master it. He mentioned that he hoped to master it like All Might. But All Might uses it all over his body, right? That's why he changes his appearance. The energy is distributed better if it's used throughout the body. Hikari said calmly, unaware of the impact it had on Izuku's head. Hundreds of thoughts went through his head that were almost heard by the young albino, if it weren't for the speed and how slowly he murmured. Hikari looked at the living room clock for a moment and discovered that it had gotten quite late. "Excuse me, but it's getting quite late and I still have things to do at home. It was a pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Midoriya," Hikari said as he began to leave the place, being accompanied by Izuku and his mother, who wished him a good night. On his way home, Hikari thought about everything that happened. For him it was strange that he had that kind of reaction with someone he had just met. The little old lady from the store had also petted his head once, but it felt different. Why did it feel different? He really had no idea. When he got home, he spent several minutes petting Kuro, who couldn't be happier to be petted. When he discovered that his thoughts weren't helping him, he started to make dinner. When he tried it, he thought it wasn't as good as Izuku's mom's. He made a mental note to improve his cooking. When he finished, he fed Kuro and then took a bath. Then he bathed Kuro too and studied for a moment. After he discovered that he couldn't concentrate, he got ready to sleep. The next morning was pretty normal. He had a pretty good breakfast. He left the food for Kuro, cleaned up a bit and headed out to the academy. It was pretty calm. At the entrance he met a huge group of people. They carried cameras, microphones and piled on top of his classmates. One of the reporters looked at his uniform, and as he was addressing them, he warned his classmates. They began to approach with their cameras and filmed his face with a microphone practically in his mouth. It puzzled Hikari a little when they asked him about All Might and what it was like to have him as a teacher and such. He just didn't answer. He stood there and blinked a little before an arm wrapped around his neck and moved him towards the chest of a man with pale blue hair, dark clothes, and his hair seemed to be dirty. Come on, let him breathe, he's really nervous," he said, still with his arm around his neck in a friendly manner. When the reporters left, he turned his face and looked closely at Hikari's face, as if wanting to learn every detail. "So it's you, huh?" It was a murmur that he barely heard, and before he realized it, he had released him from the hug, moved through the crowd and disappeared from sight. Before he could think further, he was led by his teacher inside the doors, rejecting the reporters who tried to enter only for the security doors to close. When they arrived at their classroom, they sat in their respective seats and waited for Professor Aizawa's instructions. "I hope you've rested from yesterday's combat rehearsal," he said before placing a stack of papers on the desk, startling the class a little. "I took the liberty of looking at your notes and evaluations," he said before pointing at Kitsuki, who looked slightly surprised. "Stop acting like a 7-year-old, you're wasting your own talent." Itsuki just grunted and I know before Izawa interrupted him by pointing at Izuku and pointing out his arm-destroying hero image and repeating that he had to fix that problem. Hikari, you lack motivation, start changing that from now on. Our young albino protagonist looked surprised for a moment before nodding. Now let's get back to classroom matters. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but most of the class began to sweat at the prospect of another pop quiz. We need to elect a class president. Finally a normal activity. It was a welcome surprise, though Hikari didn't understand why all the drama was over such an activity. At that moment, chaos began to erupt when all of her classmates, including Koda and Kitsuki, surprisingly raised their hands to volunteer. It was a tumult of words being shouted about the possibility of being class president. Iida then decided to silence the class to point out that not everyone was qualified for a position where the class rested on the shoulders of the chosen one, so he proposed a vote. It's still too early to have developed trust in others. Asui pointed out, being overshadowed when Kirishima mentioned that everyone would vote for themselves. And that is precisely why the person who gets the most votes will be the most suitable person for the position. Is that okay, sensei? Izawa looked at him vaguely while adjusting his mother caterpillar sleeping bag. As long as they decide by the deadline, everything is fine. With that, they began to ask for the votes, and they were placed on the board in order from highest to lowest. Midoriya Izuku 3 votes. Aoi Momo 3 votes. Hikari 1 vote. Ajiro Mashira 1 vote. Bakugo Kitsuki 1 vote. Kirishima Aijiro 1 vote. Mineta Minoru 1 vote. Gudakoji 1 vote. Shoji Mezu 1 vote. I got 3 votes. Hikari was also surprised when she saw that she received a vote. Kitsuki on the other hand, seemed quite angry by the amount of votes obtained by Izuku. Iida was quite disappointed when he saw how he did not have any votes. As there was a tie between Izuku and Momo, because Hikari voted for her after witnessing the intelligence she possessed giving her the tie point. The position of president and vice president was decided at random, Momo became president and Izuku became vice president. It was just a matter of luck because it was 50-50s. EDD really? Izuku was shaking from nerves and because of how embarrassed he was about being chosen as vice president of the class. Thank you very much, I will try. Momo thanked him as she bowed slightly. Mineta was grateful to the one above him because he sat right in front of him, giving him a rather privileged view of Momo's cleavage as he was shorter than the average person. They received several compliments for being chosen for such important positions for the class until Izawa declared the start of the lunch period. Everyone headed to the cafeteria, hoping to have their lunches. Hikari looked around the cafeteria hoping to see a place where she could sit down for lunch. Finding an almost empty table she sat down in a lonely corner while separating her chopsticks. She began to eat in silence while thinking about the situation of the class. He clearly believed that Izuku was not ready for the position. His lack of confidence and embarrassed attitude was not a good attitude for a leader. Iida could have been a good choice, but his classmates did not believe it was appropriate and Hikari did not understand why. His upright and firm attitude allowed him to make decisions that would benefit the class, discarding ideas that did not help. Izuku would not reject anyone's idea, believing that they did not have the courage as a person to do so, and that in turn would denigrate the other person. He voted for Momo because despite being arrogant at times, he usually maintains an analytical stance, in a middle point to see both spectrums of the problem. His intelligence allowed him to do that, although he could not devise a good strategy to counteract his powers. He played a quite good role in protecting the bomb and trying to immobilize him by using a team attack. Obviously he lacks experience like himself, but even so he could manage quite well. Unaware that his deep thoughts had distanced him from his surroundings, he failed to notice the sound of the alarm and the great disturbance that formed at the exit of the establishment. He stayed in place while he finished eating his lunch. A subconscious thought gave him the warning of how delicious the food was. Maybe he would implement these recipes in his own culinary skills. When he realized his surroundings, he noticed how empty the cafeteria was and thought that the lunch period was over, so he left his tray in its place and headed to room 1A. When he entered he found the classroom empty. It seemed strange to him, but he didn't pay attention when he noticed that his classmates' things were still in their place. He just sat down and waited. He heard the bell a few minutes later. He got a little confused, but let it go when he saw his classmates enter. The first ones looked at him confused, but shrugged and just sat down. When everyone was in place, the president and vice president stood in front of the class to begin the ceremony for their new positions. Momo was about to start but was interrupted by Izuku, who mentioned that he would give up his position to Iida because of his attitude during the emergency. Hikari didn't understand but let it go because in the end it was the best thing for the class. Professor Izawa didn't seem to mind so it was accepted and Iida was declared vice president of class 1A. The day passed normally after that, although he was still wondering who had given him a vote. There could be several reasons, maybe because he was the first place in the entrance exam, or how he performed in the combat trial. He had no idea, he couldn't ask the entire class for a vote, and he didn't suspect who it could have been. He followed his usual routine of feeding Kuro, cleaned his house, took a shower, prepared dinner, made a small change because instead of studying he did flexibility exercises to stretch his muscles and cleared the living room a bit to practice with a wooden goat he made when he thought of his suit. He practiced the different types of swings and attack variations, watched fencing videos to have better reference, and practiced the speed with which he could perform the movements. Even so, he wanted to move more when attacking, he wanted to implement spins, jumps, maneuvers, angles and so on when he wielded the goad. He still had doubts about how he would defend himself, but he had 3 years to perfect his style, so he didn't put too much pressure on himself. He didn't have space in his room to practice anyway, and it was too late to go out and practice somewhere. Chapter 5. V. Several days had passed since then. Hikari began a workout he had created himself. It wasn't really a complicated workout, just the fact that he didn't know in depth how to improve his physical condition slowed down his training to a certain extent, in addition to obviously having to do household chores like cleaning, washing, etc. Despite that, he managed to make time because now he was using his quite useful power to help him. It was as if he had multiple hands helping him. He couldn't do complicated things with it, but it still helped him a lot. He got up earlier than usual and went out for a run. He generally didn't sweat too much, and even less did he give off an odor that could be considered unpleasant, but he still took a quick shower before leaving. After class he dedicated himself to exercising his legs even more, after having finished his chores, of course. Today is Wednesday. Hikari did his new routine, while thinking about how to continue improving. An idea crossed his mind, and he stopped his training halfway through and turned back, took a shower and went to the academy. Obviously the training he was doing was not showing its fruits after such a short time doing them, so he remained almost at the same level with which he arrived, although having studied his combat style more helped him improve a little. First he thought about a style that involved only long-range attacks, but he discarded it because it would drain his stamina quickly and he would become progressively more useless. The next option was to focus on the increased strength of his quirk, but he discarded it because he felt it was too basic a style and that it involved being in constant risk by only focusing on the attack. Next was a defensive style, but obviously it was not going to work because his quirk focuses more on attack. He was looking at more options until he found an answer to his dilemma. The fast style was simple. If he was fast enough to attack and avoid being attacked, he could use a style that disoriented his opponents. He didn't need too much strength because, as already mentioned, his quirk provided a boost of power to be effective. He could also implement sudden long-distance attacks, although they were rarer because he had to take great care of his stamina. When he arrived at his class, he discovered he was the first to arrive, of course, because it was much earlier than the students usually arrived. With nothing in particular to do, he settled into his seat and waited for the others to arrive. A few minutes passed until the next person entered the classroom. Momoyoi Rozu. Hikari had no particular thoughts about her, other than recognizing her great intelligence. They used to talk to each other from time to time in class, but generally it was only to ask about doubts they had about the subject. For Hikari it became a habit that every time she had a doubt about the subject, she would turn to Momo, hoping that she would help her. Hikari. To Momo he was just a really pale boy who sat next to her, but she still couldn't help but feel curious about him. He spoke really little, to the point that he never started a conversation and wouldn't speak if he could respond with gestures. His strength at the class level was quite high, but he never boasted about it or looked down on others. Despite his calm attitude, he was quite clumsy, but he never thought that he wasn't smart. The fact that he had beaten him was due to the simple fact that his quirk was the most complex in the class to deal with. Even so, she found it really entertaining to see his reactions to various common situations. Once, she tried to ask him if he knew about a complex problem. He was silent for a full minute and she thought he seemed frozen or just gathering his thoughts. Afterward, he just told her he had no idea. He was frowning slightly in concentration. She wanted to laugh at that. It was truly curious the way he reacted and she could never predict how she would react. She found herself staring at him more than she was willing to admit. He was of average height but looked incredibly small, wearing a uniform a size or two too big. He never neglected his posture when sitting. She, who had been taught to maintain a straight and elegant posture, somehow grew tired of it and would unconsciously relax it from time to time. It was hard to figure this out because of his clothes. She wondered how he slept if his horns pointed backward. She also wondered if his horns were hollow or bone. She was just curious. She never saw him angry, sad, or happy. She never saw him nervous or embarrassed, and she never, ever looked at the body when looking at a person. She knew she had a larger bust than most of the girls in her class, though she didn't know why people, men and women in general, found themselves staring, men more than women. But it always bothered her that people were noticing her body. She wanted to be acknowledged for more than that. But Hikari never looked at her body. She always looked into her eyes when they talked, and her gaze never wavered. Back to Hikari. "Ah, what a shame, I wanted to be the first to arrive." He heard Momo say that as she walked over to the seat next to him and watched her sit down. He was silent for a few seconds. "Why did you get here so early?" He was a little surprised when the question left Momo's lips. "I started morning training a little while ago, but I decided to finish early today." Momo nodded in response, but she still kept looking at him. He didn't feel awkward, but he felt compelled to say something more. "And why did you want to be the first to arrive, Yayoi Rozu-san?" Hikari watched as Momo's face reddened, but he didn't understand why. "Ah, well, that's because since I recently became the class president, I thought I could set a good example if I arrived earlier than the rest." Momo thought she sounded quite childish and was embarrassed by it. Hikari just nodded and looked straight ahead. That ended the conversation so quickly, Momo thought. Hikari had no real opinion on Momo's reason for arriving early, so she just stayed silent. "So, why did you finish early?" Momo said in an attempt to lengthen their conversation further. Hikari turned in her direction and tilted her head, a rather cute sight in Momo's opinion, although she didn't think she could say that out loud. "I have some questions about my training, and I wanted to ask All Might." The reason she wanted to ask All Might instead of Aizawa was quite simple. All Might is really hot, or in more refined words, All Might seemed to have a pretty extensive knowledge about improving someone's physical condition, or so Hikari thought. Those muscles weren't built overnight. It was quite logical to ask All Might, who has a really big and strong body, rather than Aizawa, who seemed to be too lazy to even walk. Although now that he knew a little about One for All, he wasn't sure if his muscles were achieved with his quirk or was his real body. "We still haven't done any other hero activities apart from combat rehearsal. Do you think we'll do another rehearsal today?" Momo asked with the same intention. Hikari was referring to the incident between Katsuki and Izuku. "You're right, that was really irresponsible." Momo seemed a little annoyed by that. "If we face each other again, I assure you I'll put up a bigger fight," Momo said determinedly as she pointed her finger at Hikari. "Of course," was Hikari's quick and disinterested response to Momo's statement, which faltered a little, but still stood firm. Did he really seem uninterested in fighting? Or was it just because she was the one who said it? Anyway, they couldn't continue talking because their classmates were already arriving in their classrooms. After that, the day passed normally until Professor Aizawa's class. "Regarding the fundamental skills of heroism that we will be studying today, it has been decided that you will be supervised by a group of 3 men made up of All Might, another person, and me," their teacher explained while observing the reactions of his class. "Sensei. What are we going to do?" One of his classmates raised his hand while leaning upwards so he would notice who was asking. "Be the hero everyone needs, whether it's a flood or any other disaster," Aizawa said as he took a card out of a folder and showed it to the class. "It's the rescue rehearsal." There was a small big commotion about what the rehearsal would entail and its difficulty. Some were starting to get motivated by the idea of another rehearsal, and others, like Katsuki, were frustrated by wanting another combat rehearsal. "Don't get ahead of yourself." But those words, everyone fell silent as they looked closely at their sensei. "As I was saying, this time, it's entirely up to each one of you whether or not you wear your costume. Some of your costumes probably won't be suited for the task at hand, after all," he pointed out disinterestedly as he continued his explanation about the meeting area to take a bus to their place of activity. Once this was pointed out, they went to the locker room while chatting animatedly. As they were changing, Shoji started a casual conversation with Hikari. "Doesn't it bother you to have your hair that long?" he asked as he took out his hero costume and watched Hikari take out hers. "Not really, it's quite comfortable." It was true, his hair was longer than the average boy in his class, being surpassed only by his sensei. Hey, don't you look like a girl with that hair?" The short boy with grape hair asked while laughing, obviously mockingly that Hikari didn't understand, so she masterfully ignored him. Hikari had a rather fine face if one looked closely, in a certain sense it made him look quite androgynous. The reason for this is that, as I hope you know, the protagonist of Hollow Knight is an Highschool being. Not that I have a fetish for this, I just wanted to stick as close as possible to what the origin of this character is. "Oh, that's right, you have a girl's face," said a blonde boy with black lightning bolt-shaped locks as he grabbed Hikari's face and inspected it. Long eyelashes, thick lips but not too much, being what would be described as a perfect face in proportion. "I think that's out of place," Shoji said as with one of his arms he separated Mineta and Kaminari from the confused Hikari, who remained silent. That was a strange vision that the other men in the class received. In their vision it seemed that Kaminari was about to kiss Hikari. The fact that, as Kaminari said, Hikari has a feminine face, and on top of that was without clothes on the upper part of her body, being a sight that disturbed them deeply. After the strange incident they dressed normally and headed to the meeting point. When they got on the bus after the strange way in which Ida led them to form. Hikari, who was sitting next to Momo, and on her other side was Ichako. Shoji was sitting behind him. "Excuse me, Aoi Rozu-san." He caught Momo's attention, which when she saw Hikari's face knew that she had a question. "Tell me." Momo answered, to which Hikari brought her face closer. "Do I have a strange face?" The fact that her face was so close to Momo's caught her off guard, but she calmed down when she heard what she asked. "A strange face?" Momo asked back, not understanding the reason for the question. "Well, when we were changing clothes Kaminari-san said I had a woman's face, so I thought he meant I had a strange face." Momo blinked at her explanation, then was more surprised when she discovered that she in fact had a quite feminine face, although she still retained her gender-determined characteristics, like her perfectly straight jaw. Everything else was quite feminine, her eyelashes were long and a bit thick, her eyebrows were perfectly placed, her nose was thin, and her lips were quite thick but looked thin. "Whoa, it's true." She exclaimed unintentionally, drawing Ichako and Shoji's attention. "What's true?" asked a girl with brown hair and a permanent blush as she approached Momo. Momo began to explain the situation to Ichako, who looked closely at his face. "Doesn't his long hair make him look even more feminine?" Ichako said. Momo turned to him and cupped his face, brushing the unruly strands away from his face. "Right, haven't you thought about cutting it?" Momo asked, letting go of Hikari's face. Shoji saw this almost as deja vu. "Maybe I will, but it's quite convenient." Hikari said, ignoring the looks she was receiving from Kaminari and Mineta. "Well, it would be nice if you did." Shoji said suddenly. Hikari didn't seem perturbed by his intrusion into the conversation. It would be awkward if an incident like the one in the locker room happened again. Shoji had to look away when he felt the curious glances of Uraraka and Momo. What happened in the locker room? Shoji had to shut Hikari's mouth as she was about to answer, although he didn't know how she would tell it, it was more than likely that it would be misinterpreted. He approached her ear to whisper. "It's because of our pride as men, please don't say what happened there." Shoji whispered to Hikari, who, although he didn't understand why that mattered, accepted and remained silent, although they tried to find out more about it. Then they surprisingly saw how Katsuki was the center of Asui's mockery, although Izuku began to sweat when before that she pointed out that his quirk resembled All Might's. They were casual conversations that filled the environment. Hikari felt relaxed. "Incredible. Is this USJ?" one of his classmates shouted when they saw the facilities. "Floods, landslides, fires, etc." said a person as he approached the group of surprised students. "This is a practical training area that I have created to simulate all types of disasters and accidents, and its name is..." The figure showed himself as hero number 13, more me ahem, sorry, let's continue. "Ultimate space for jams," he said as he opened his arms to welcome them to the facilities. "It's the space hero, number 13. said Izuku as he began to babble about the details of his heroic deeds. Uraraka was excited when he pointed out that she had always liked hero number 13. 13 began the explanation of why All Might wasn't with him and about some details about his quirk. However, quirks are also powers that can be easily used to kill people. And in that same way, it is no different from any of your quirks. That explanation left the students of Class A quite silent, including Hikari, who reflected on the care she had to take to not accidentally kill a person. After a long explanation about how society worked, about the fact that people literally have the power to kill each other, the sense of danger that All Might tried to teach them, and so on. That's all. You have my gratitude for listening to me so attentively and patiently. Hikari noticed how Aizawa seemed to look in another direction. She followed his gaze towards a fountain that was in the place, and she could see how a black dot began to expand, and a person with several hands over his face came out. "Gather in one place and don't move." The students were quite confused by Aizawa's sudden order, and also by the fact that they didn't expect their lazy sensei to shout like that. 13 Protect the students. Many more people came out of the hole as it expanded further. "What is that? Is this like the entrance exam training pattern?" The hero Eris head put on his glasses. "Don't move. They are villains." The shadow with eyes started to move slowly. Eris head and number 13, according to the resume we got a few days ago, Mr. All Might was supposed to be here and yet. I knew it, everything that happened that day was the work of you jerks. The person with hands on his body walked to the side of the shadow with eyes. "Where is he? We went through so much trouble and brought so many of us here, you can't tell me that All Might, the symbol of peace, isn't here." I wonder if he'll appear if we kill all these brats. That comment sent chills down the spines of almost all the students who seemed scared by the intruders who turned out to be villains. They began to wonder about the alarms and the places they were attacking. Professor Aizawa ordered them to evacuate and for Kaminari to try to contact the main building. Izuku tried to reason with his sensei that facing so many enemies at once with a non-offensive quirk was practically suicide. A hero always has more than one trick up his sleeve. Aizawa answered without hesitation and entrusted the class to the 13th hero before launching into the battlefield. Hikari had to admit that despite the situation, she had to give her sensei more credit than she originally gave him, seeing how he dominated his enemies despite their lack of strong attacks, agility, and the use of his bandages did most of the work. Despite facing a person with a mutant-type quirk, he managed to defeat him before he made his move. And so fear began to spread through the lazy man when they saw how he dominated so many enemies. When Class 1 tried to evacuate, they were suddenly intercepted by the shadow that was actually a purple mist with glowing yellow eyes and metal plates under its eyes that gave it the shape of a neck. Greetings, we are the Alliance of Villains. I apologize for the presumption, but we took the liberty of entering UA Academy, the hero base, in order to meet with Mr. All Might, the symbol of peace. And we wondered if we would have the chance to exterminate it. That statement filled the students with uncertainty, who had no idea how to act in a situation like this. Wasn't Mr. All Might supposed to be present at this juncture? By any chance, has something been altered? Ah, well, leaving that aside. The fog began to expand and deform. This is my role. Suddenly Kitsuki and Kirishima approached running, one launched a powerful explosion and the other attempted a hardened punch. Despite their attempts, the fog did not stop, it began to surround and cover the students who were partially paralyzed. I still can't recognize the target. He said suddenly as the fog continued to cover them. Hikari, deciding that she had waited long enough, jumped forward and covered herself with her power to try to break through the fog. But she did successfully due to the suddenness and the fact that she was distracted by how the black mass covered her and propelled her out of the affected area. Hikari turned around to see how he would be able to help his class, but his plan didn't go that far, so he just stood there. How did he get out? The mist asked itself before reacting. May I know your name? The strange mist politely asked Hikari, who seemed quite surprised by the question. Before anyone could tell him he didn't have to answer, the young albino had already answered its question. Hikari, I understand. The mist said to itself again before closing in completely on Hikari's classmates, leaving only a few outside. Hikari knew that even if he could get close enough, he had no way to help them, so he could only look through his mask, which he put on after getting off the bus. Good, I found the target. The mist said to no one in particular. Hikari pulled out the stinger hanging from his back and took a stance, ready for combat if necessary. He heard his classmates devise a plan so Iida could escape and be able to warn the academy about the incident. The 13th hero prepared his vacuum cleaner powered by his quirk and began to absorb everything he could. He did not count on the villain's ability was more problematic than he thought and created a portal behind and in front of 13, which began to absorb himself. Iida, warned by the others, began to run, almost being intercepted by the fog villain if it weren't for Shoji who cleared the way in time. Iida managed to escape and ran as fast as he could until he reached a door that blocked his way. Uraraka reached the solid body of the villain and sent him flying with her quirk, and Sato helped hold him back. Iida managed to open the door and ran again. Hikari, who watched as he ran away, remembered her sensei and ran in his direction. When she arrived she found a monster with a bird-like face, but with its brain exposed, very large, above Izuku who had a terrified face. Hikari ran as fast as possible. She raised her stinger and with all her strength cut off the arm that was about to impale Izuku. Blood splattered Hikari's weapon, hair and mask. The monster didn't seem affected and attacked Hikari with its other arm, but the void covered the young albino's body, and its blow pierced him like a ghost. The monster's arm came out again, but Hikari wasn't interested in it, she advanced towards the man with sky blue hair. She raised her stinger again, but this time the blunt part. Its stinger was covered in black, and she brought it down with impressive speed and hit the man in the head, sending him several meters away from his companions. He didn't stop, having seen how the monster moved, possibly already upon him. His body covered itself again and he jumped. He was right as the beast's fist had pierced his back, no damage luckily. He couldn't rest as the other arm came towards him again. Having seen its regeneration, he knew he wouldn't kill it with just cuts. First he cut off the arm because otherwise he would have killed Izuku. He raised his stinger and with a swing he cut off the limb, splashing more blood but avoiding being torn apart. And so began a dance of blood. The monster's arms were slashed every now and then, most were dodged by intangibility. Hikari's hair was turning red and he was already starting to tire, but he still didn't stop. His companions watched in shock as their quiet and innocent companion bathed in the blood of an immortal monster. One jump and one slash were made. One turn and he became intangible again, which would have blown his head off. The incredible concentration Hikari was exerting to keep this monster at bay was the only thing buying him time for the professionals to arrive. He decided he'd gain information in the process. His weaponless arm cloaked in black as it emerged from his cloak and formed into a fist of darkness. He punched straight at the monster when he saw an opening. But it didn't flinch. It was too heavy to lift and its speed was greater than his own. His only saving grace was his intangibility, but he needed a few seconds to use them again. He tried another punch and the same thing happened. The man with the hand slowly got up from the terrible blow he received. He almost thought his head would be ripped off. He turned around and what he saw shocked him greatly. The Nomu they created was running towards Hikari. He was defending and counterattacking. The Nomu was faster, so the boy just waited for it to get closer. He dodged, attacked, and defended almost at the same time. The boy jumped under a blow and severed the outstretched arm. He jumped slightly back upon landing to dodge another downward blow and covered himself in emptiness, dodging the blow from the newly regenerated arm. He approached and retreated constantly, slashing and hitting here and there. He cut off the arms so that they would stop to regenerate, to let out air and continue the cycle. In a moment of carelessness, a downward blow hit near him, raising a layer of dust and stunning him. Quickly, an arm shot out towards him. The arm reached his head and was about to burst it when it was covered again in emptiness. He slipped out of her grasp, leaving his cloak behind. His mask was cracked and fell off, revealing his sweaty face, even though he wasn't sweating much. His breathing was ragged and his brow was furrowed in concentration. "Pastor, Nomu." The man spoke. Hikari was surprised for a moment, which was taken advantage of by the Nomu. He jumped at the Nomu with his vacuum wing boost, landed behind him and slashed his leg. The Nomu lost his balance, and Hikari took the opportunity to jump away and catch her breath. "Damn that brat, we're supposed to take him, but he's causing so much trouble." Izuku heard the man say that and his eyes widened. Hikari jumped over the Nomu's fist and slashed it. As he fell he ducked and dodged an uppercut. He rolled back when the Nomu tried to step on him and was covered in vacuum when he saw the blow he couldn't dodge. He jumped back and saw black particles coming out of his body. He had little time left. So far, he'd discovered that he could absorb the impact of blows, regenerate very quickly, and was very, very fast and strong. The Nomu lunged at him again. He heard a loud bang, but he couldn't stop to think now. He dodged and slashed, a blow to the head, and jumped back to cut off the other incoming blow. He landed and slashed to the leg, knocking it off balance, and dodged the slow blow due to the loss of balance. He heard a voice, but he couldn't stop. His life was at stake if he stopped. Blood gushed from the monster, bathing the exhausted Hikari. He wouldn't last long. He wasn't as agile as his sensei, nor did he have his stamina. The only thing keeping him alive was his quirk. His legs shook from exhaustion when he landed, but he didn't stop. He heard multiple thuds elsewhere, but he ignored them. He had to protect his comrades. He had to protect his friend. That makes a hero. And he wanted to be a hero. He felt his legs give way when he landed again. He swung his stinger and severed the leg again, though not entirely due to his lack of stamina. The reason Hikari can sever Nomu limbs is because the vacuum generates an additional burst of force, like with punches. He saw a punch coming towards him. He couldn't dodge it. He couldn't use his quirk. His leg regenerated again and added more power. He was exhausted. He had never pushed himself so hard to the point of collapse. He could only watch as the fist came closer to his face. He felt a push. It was a very strong push and it sent him tumbling into a rock. He hit his head, blood spurting out, but he couldn't tell if it was his own or that of the monster whose limbs he had cut off so many times. He looked at his body bathed in blood, bubbles of emptiness rising and dissolving into the air. He was dazed, his vision blurred, and he was breathing so desperately he felt he didn't have enough room in his mouth to keep taking in air. He heard loud bangs and blows, saw figures moving, but couldn't distinguish them. His mind was exhausted from reacting to such rapid attacks, and the lack of oxygen from not being able to breathe to rest meant he could only hear and see about 15% of what a normal person can perceive. He heard a loud bang that sounded like lightning. It stirred a breeze so he could breathe. He refused to pass out. He couldn't do it without first knowing that his friend and companions were okay. He heard the sounds of footsteps. He couldn't distinguish the direction or the distance. He saw some kind of multicolored abstract painting. Other loud bangs sounded. His brain began to fill with oxygen again. Now his vision began to clear, but he couldn't move his body much due to exhaustion, and vacuum bubbles kept coming out of his body. If he had released more vacuum, he would probably lose control. He was very, very lucky. He saw his clothes stained with blood. His hair felt wet, his face a little, but blood almost fell into his eyes, so he was lucky. His hearing began to return. He looked a little further and saw All Might standing on top of a large crater, threatening the villains who began to grumble. He didn't see that beast anywhere. He would have sighed in relief if he didn't need that oxygen. Suddenly he heard Iida's voice. President of Class 1A, Iida Tenya. Reporting for duty. Behind Iida were about 10 professional heroes. They tried to capture the heroes who tried to catch All Might but couldn't because they had left with the help of the fog villain. All Might was getting smaller and thinner. He had a brief exchange of words with Izuku, who had broken his leg and arm again. Cementus had created a wall so no one could see All Might in his weak form. Now that he thought about it, it was likely that he fainted a couple of times while sitting there on the wall he crashed into. All Might had probably pushed him. Suddenly they started gathering their companions. They hadn't seen him yet. Maybe it was the fact that he looked like a corpse because of all the blood on him. They were leaving the building without him. Except for the police, no one had noticed. Move over, villain. The heroine tried to get him to move when she saw him move a little. I am not a villain. Hikari spoke with difficulty. The woman was dressed in an outfit inappropriate for a heroine and looked at him as if he were trash. Lying won't save you from going to prison, villain. He was about to refute when he heard a voice shout from the entrance. Excuse me, we're missing a partner. It was Momo, who was present at the head count of her companions, and they discovered that he was missing. Who's missing? Asked a hero near her. He's a boy with horns and white hair, he has black eyes and his name is Hikari. Momo informed the heroes. The woman who managed to hear his description turned her head towards him. They stared into each other's eyes for a moment and she inspected his head with her eyes. There were white strands that weren't covered with blood and his horns were visible. I think they're talking about you. The woman said, a little embarrassed. Snapping out of her embarrassed moment, she warned Momo that he was there. When Momo and Shoji approached and saw his condition, they almost fainted. What happened to you? Momo asked in alarm as she ran up and looked at his blood-covered figure. Hikari, having caught her breath, answered. I was fighting a very fast and strong monster that could regenerate its body. I had to cut its arm several times so it wouldn't kill me. Was the brief explanation he gave. Shoji, having overcome the shock, helped Hikari get up. I think I'll need help walking. Hikari said, to which Momo offered her support. Did you hurt yourself anywhere? Shoji asked as he handed Hikari to Momo. I only hit my head on that wall, otherwise I'm just exhausted and a lot. He said vaguely. How are the others? Hikari asked as Momo helped him walk to the exit. No one except Aizawa-sensei, All Might and Midoriya-san is hurt. Momo reported, trying not to vomit from the putrid smell of blood. Hikari saw her reaction and apologized to her for helping him. And no, it's my duty as president to look after the well-being of all your classmates. Thank you. She replied sleepily. Despite the situation, Momo wanted to laugh at the way Hikari was nodding off. When they arrived with the others, they threw a bucket of water on her, which removed most of the blood from her hair and face, but there was still some left, and on her clothes too. Her classmates were about to ask what had happened to her when a mask came out of Hikari's body and manifested as a double with round wide eyes. What is that? Kirishima asked, before Hikari's body fell unconscious and the void clone floated above it. The clone remained silent and only floated above Hikari. Then it began to wander near her classmates. Cementus, who was one of her teachers, saw Hikari's shadow. Don't do anything hostile. He warned when the shadow wandered and floated until it stopped in front of Momo. The shadow brought its face close to hers and seemed to inspect her. Her classmates were confused and Momo was mostly scared. The eyes of this dark being shone, but it wasn't a normal shine that she usually sees in Hikari's eyes, it was a wild shine that made her feel tiny. The shadow stood behind Momo and lightly pushed her with its arms, urging her to move forward. But she did more out of instinct than anything else, she let herself be led by the shadow, and finally they reached Hikari's prone body, which hadn't been lifted by Cementus's orders. The shadow floated over Hikari's body after leaving Momo in front of it, made a gesture, and Momo seemed to understand that she should lift it. When she did, the shadow stirred slightly and followed Momo, who was carrying Hikari to a stretcher. Professor, what is that? Momo asked, quite uncomfortable by the close following of Hikari's shadow. It's a shadow, so to speak. In its report it said that when you get close to total exhaustion, the excess emptiness accumulates in that shadow and stores it so that your body can recover properly without wasting energy containing the excess emptiness and concentrating on recovering. Well, for the entire class it was a revelation. The problem is that it is usually a shadow with a very primitive personality. It attacks anyone who shows signs of hostility and only it chooses who will carry its body. For class 1 it was too much for one day, so they ignored the shadow that followed Momo and went to be interrogated and be able to go home. Momo took Hikari to the infirmary and left him there along with his shadow that followed her with his eyes until she left. It's a drawing of the protagonist. Well, it just gave me the motivation and I did the drawing that had been erased. I put more effort into the face than anything else, but I guess it's okay. Now I guess I'll tell you how I came up with the character. Hikari. I got the name from Google Translate, it means flash. It's ironic so I put it in. The last name thing is simply because I'm bad with names and I could also make the origin of his parents very mysterious and everything. I was thinking of having dark skin, but I discarded it because I didn't think it made sense. The character is based more on Hornet than the main character from Hollow Knight because I liked her design and fighting style more. I'm only good at imitating images and this one that came out of my head isn't that well done. Now. I was planning on giving Hikari's partner a power-up, assuming they already know who she is. I don't plan on giving Hikari power-ups because I think her power is already strong enough and useful for what I have in mind. But I don't want the character's relationship to become stuck in the cliché that one is stronger and therefore has to protect the other. By the way, the nemesis will be a woman. You can already imagine who she is from the game. Chapter 6. Vi. After a while, the shadow returned to his body, thus completing his recovery, although he couldn't leave before being interrogated and reprimanded for such an irresponsible and stupid act. Now he was on his way home, walking slower due to muscle exhaustion and being lost in his thoughts. For the first time in a long time, he felt an emotion that he could feel loud and clear, not taking into account the incident at the Midoriya house of course. He couldn't describe it, but it didn't make it any less important. The reason he was so thoughtful was because of the trigger for said emotion. What triggered so much emotion? That his friend was in danger was possibly the most logical option, but he still couldn't be entirely sure. The flash covered his vision, blinding him for a moment. So you're his vessel? A female voice was heard whispering in his ear. Turning quickly, Hikari couldn't have looked more surprised. In his vision, he found himself staring at an extremely beautiful girl. Pale but shiny blonde hair, thick and well combed, she wore a dress the same color as her hair and had amber eyes. Relax, I'm not going to fight right now. She smiled playfully as she jumped around him, she was quite tall. Your fight today was amazing, it's a shame it's not developed yet, we would have entertained each other. She seemed entertained by Hikari's bewildered expression. Even if you were weakened, you could defeat me like this. She pointed at herself with a disappointed expression, then smiled and got closer to Hikari's face. Despite having an inferior physical body, it's amazing what you can accomplish. I have only been able to create this human body in this time, and even with the nature of my power, I would not be able to defeat you, she lightly caressed Hikari's face, who couldn't find a way to answer or ask, instead she just stood. I wanted to take you but. Despite how useful you can be. It's disgusting. Her attitude didn't change, but the poison in her words could still be detected. That emptiness completely denies my existence, even with my light I haven't been able to eliminate it, that beast without will or conscience shouldn't exist in a world surrounded by light. Despite being smiling, she looked extremely annoyed. But now that all that emptiness is accumulating in you, if I eliminate you I can finally end. She laughed a little. A receptacle, capable of containing emptiness and light equally, too bad you're not pure. She was laughing a little louder as she caressed her face. The lower beings that roam this world, I will give them a light to follow, and even if you are able to contain it, you will not be able to prevent it from dominating you, just like the one before you. She laughed and began to glow, then disappeared in an explosion of disintegrating feathers. What was that? Hikari, after a few seconds processing what he said, she couldn't understand much, she knew about his power, the one before him. What is that supposed to mean? Receptacle. Light. There were too many things to process so she continued on her way. When he got home, he did his routine on automatic, his mind completely lost in the events that happened. He couldn't think of anything until he was ready to sleep. Before me? I don't understand, what am I? Why were you looking for me? He decided he wouldn't find those answers so he lay down, and hoping to rest he slept. In the dream. Here again, in the void that covers the infinity that he can't touch, but nevertheless he knows it's there, why does he remember being here when he doesn't remember it being awake? In front of him was his shadow, darker than the background and with bright white bottomless eyes that looked through him. They raised their hands at the same time and their palms touched. Who are you? The shadow didn't answer, it just stood there. He felt the shadow's hand embrace his own hand, the warmth spreading up his arm. The reason was that the void that formed the shadow swallowed his limb, but he wasn't scared, he didn't think about anything as the void slowly covered his body. His head was the only one that wasn't covered. The colossal shadow rose over his shadow, blacker than the void. He didn't know there was such a dark black. How could something be that dark? The characteristic horns and 8 eyes opened, watching his tiny figure being consumed. The 4 completely covering his face, part of the void entered his left eye, covering his vision for a second before it cleared. Despite being covered, he could see through it. The flash covers your vision, only the void of existence is able to reverse its effect on you, only in you, the respadicle will live off the void, you will feed on it, you will see through it, you need a more powerful shell, without it you will be consumed in the light that disturbs creation, the essence, you must be able to manipulate it now, strengthen yourself, and you will fulfill your mission. Symbols with strange symbols inside them began to float and joined the void that consuming him. The white substance came out of his chest, briefly illuminating with a dim light, the necklace he received from his parents. The scattered light came together violently and entered his necklace. Out of the dream. Another morning settled at his window as the light made the sleep fade from his eyes. Sitting up in his bed, he checked the time. It's quite late to train. He told himself before being distracted by Kuro, who curled up in his lap. Looking down at the cat, he felt liquid flow from his left eye. Tears. He thought as he wiped his face with his hand. He looked at his hand, which was splashed with a black vacuum-like liquid, which didn't moisten his hand despite being a liquid. The cat licked his hand before rubbing against it. Without paying much attention to it, he got up and did his morning toilet, preparing his and Kuro's breakfast. Having a leisurely breakfast, he then dressed in his uniform and left home. Taking public transportation, he headed to the academy. The liquid continued to flow from his eye despite having checked in the mirror. His eye was still normal, but the tear duct continued to expel that liquid. His mind wandered between the academy, his home, and the progress at the laboratory to which he had sent samples for analysis. He hadn't received a report in a while. Perhaps the investigation was cancelled, but it was unlikely, so perhaps they didn't find anything new. It's not a surprise since they haven't discovered anything concrete for a while. She reached the door and headed to her classroom. When she entered she found Momo already sitting down. She walked silently to her seat. Momo seemed quite distracted because she didn't seem to notice until she sat down. "Wow, you gave me a scare," she said with a sigh of relief. "Are you feeling better now?" Momo asked. Hikari nodded like many other times. "I'm still a little worried about everything that happened at the USJ, no one can guarantee that they won't attack again." Momo seemed somewhat distressed. Hikari looked at the expression on her face, not knowing what it was like to feel particularly unsure about what will happen with it. "Maybe we'll just have to be prepared." Momo said more to herself than to Hikari. "We must improve, become stronger so that we can be the heroes we want to be." She said her little speech, although a second later her face reddened. "Haha, I think it's a bit embarrassing to say that out loud." "That's strong and you will fulfill your purpose," that phrase echoed in her mind. Who said that? What is my mission? Why me? Her head felt heavy with all her questions. "What happened to your eye?" Momo asked, bringing her hand closer to wipe the black liquid that came out of her tear duct. "I don't know, it's been dripping since this morning, but it doesn't affect me." The hum came out of Momo as she watched the drops come out of her eyes. Then she moved away a little and took a handkerchief out of her uniform pocket, wiping the drops that fell from her eye with it. "I don't think it'll stop," Momo said thoughtfully, before suggesting she go to Recovery Girl to have it checked out. A third person appeared in the room, her pink skin making her stand out as she entered, and a mischievous look appeared on her face as she ran over. Momo looked embarrassed and backed away as Shido approached her and began to whisper to her. Hikari couldn't hear their conversation and decided it would be rude to eavesdrop. As Shido continued her conversation with Momo, Professor Aizawa, covered in bandages, peeked around the door. "Oh, how nice to see you here, Hikari, the principal. Requests your presence." Hikari, despite his confusion, nodded and stood up. He was guided by his teacher. Hikari asked him if he would be able to work with his injuries, but his sensei simply dismissed his concerns. Entering a well-organized office, he was greeted by an animal sitting on the desk. It made a small sarcastic comment about what kind of animal it could be before introducing itself as the principal. "Well, leaving jokes aside, and also the fact of your recklessness in facing the creature known as Nomu in the USJ, there is another matter which I want to discuss with you." His tone became slightly more serious. "As I have informed, you left samples of the substance that makes up your quirk in the Monomon laboratory, right?" Hikari nodded, although she did not understand the point he wanted to get at with that. "I was informed that the laboratory was recently attacked by the recently recognized League of Villains." That now was a surprise. The Monomon laboratory was recognized as one of the facilities that was dedicated, among many things, to analyzing quirks like those of Hikari or her partner Ishido, which usually release substances that are difficult to recognize, and there is always the risk that they have poisonous substances or some other effects that could be dangerous. They were also dedicated to studying the beginning of peculiarities, despite not being a very frequented topic. So their information and the facilities themselves carried with them a security system almost on par with the UA. Apparently they took large quantities of the sample you provided and other things that are not so important to highlight, such as the reports on your quirk and how it works. The problem is that they seem to have a worrying interest in your peculiarity. Well, that was also a surprise, although I knew that her peculiarity was quite strange and unpredictable, I did not believe it was so strange. Suddenly, as if an enlightenment had come to her, Hikari's eyes widened in surprise. The girl she had seen yesterday on the way home said something about her power and how she had tried to take it away while she was cooperating with a league of villains. What's going on? The teacher asked, seeing the sudden surprise appear on Hikari's face. There was a girl I ran into on my way home yesterday. She mentioned that she was related to the League of Villains and that they had tried to take me with them at the time of the attack. The principal and his teacher opened their eyes wide upon hearing that. Yesterday before leaving, Izuku Midoriya had told them that he had heard one of the villains mention that Hikari was the target they had to take, or in simpler words, they had to kidnap him. They had calmed Izuku's worries, but that didn't mean they could let something like that go. For obvious reasons, the students are the priority in a facility that is dedicated to caring for and fostering the learning of its students. With that, they already had a plan that could guarantee Hikari's safety for the moment, but only for the young albino, telling that to the other students would cause panic which would interfere with decision-making. The fact that they tell Hikari all this is in fact because she doesn't have legal guardians who can handle this information. Well, after class I want you to tell me the details about the conversation and why you didn't immediately notify the authorities. Hikari nodded in understanding. Now because of this and the recent interest of the villains in you, we decided that it would be safer for you to remain within our reach, so you will be given a room within the academy facilities. Your authorization must be requested to carry out the entire procedure due to the lack of adults responsible for you. Hikari listened in silence to her director's explanation. She didn't really have any major problems with the change of environment beyond Kuro. Your class will not be involved for the moment, and I would like it to remain that way for a while longer. The details of everything involved with permissions and transfer of belongings will be seen after your study day. Hikari nodded before slightly raising her hand. Can I take my pet? Although the director thought she might have some doubts, he didn't believe it could be one as simple as the fact that having a pet can mean a big problem. I don't think there would be much of a problem beyond the fact that it might cause some disorder. Professor Aizawa glanced lightly at the clock in the room before nodding to the principal before leaving, probably to attend to his class. Okay, now I hope you keep this a secret from your classmates. If they ask you, just tell them I gave you a warning for the reckless act you had at the USJ, which we will discuss now. Hikari nodded at her principal's request and waited for him to get started on the subject at hand. First of all, what you did was a very reckless act that could have caused you to be seriously injured. I can't scold you too much because if it weren't for your recklessness, one of your classmates might not have been with us. She explained briefly before pausing at his last comment. Obviously, it's a rather grim event that one of your classmates is torn apart by an unknown beast. Secondly, I wanted you to answer a few questions for me about the fact that despite everything, you were able to hold your own quite well in combat against the Nomu and why you had to carry it out in such a bloody way. Hikari looked into the principal's eyes for a few seconds, meditating on how she could explain it before deciding. I think the reason I was able to hold on for so long is because I was really focused. I couldn't think of anything other than preventing him from being killed, and I guess that helped me improve my reflexes. The reason he was cutting off his limbs is because if I hadn't, he would have caught up with me. It took him a fairly short time to regenerate, but those seconds were enough to prevent him from reaching his maximum speed and slow him down enough for him to breathe a little. I couldn't carry out that strategy for too long, so I sought to disorient him by passing through his blows or his body. The director listened to his explanation in silence. It is well known that people in cases of extreme danger tend to improve their abilities in order to avoid that danger, so it is not unreasonable to believe that the same thing happened to Hikari. He was a little more disturbed by the ease with which he tells how he could have been killed and the lack of emotion when talking about the reason that led him to cut off limbs. Well, that would be all. You can go. You should know that you probably missed Mr. Aizawa's explanation about the sports festival. Hikari nodded. He really knew about the festival. Well, who doesn't? The fact that he wanted to join UA was one of the reasons that led him to investigate their common activities that involved the public, and the sports festival was in fact one of the most important ones. As you can see, I don't feel like writing the long explanation of the festival, so I'll skip it, and if by now you don't know, I guess you should just investigate. You should also notice the lack of organization when uploading chapters, and it is that I do not have a fixed schedule. I have classes that consume a lot of time, and I still have my hobby of drawing, which also consumes a lot of time. Since I am not extremely good, Hikari's drawing is not one of my best because I did it in a hurry, also because I am a fan of fan stories and light novels like the otaku that I am. Also, I only write something when I have a good idea that can guide the story to an interesting point. I warn you that I will not follow the original events of the series to the letter. I also was a little pissed off by the images of spoilers from the manga, because I had planned to guide Hikari to a similar path. I really hope that if I do it, you do not tell me things like that I copied the manga, and that I have not read the manga, and I am advancing along with the story. As he approached his classroom, he could hear Chako's voice yelling about how she would try hard. Upon entering, she discovered that her teacher Aizawa's short class had possibly already ended, so they had their break time. She saw how Midoriya, Chako and Iida were talking before leaving the classroom. She was about to follow them before she ran into Shoji. "Ah, Hikari, here you are. Yayoi Rozu-san told me that the principal had called you." Nodding, Shoji asked her the reason and gave the excuse that the principal had told him to say. Shoji also asked about her health, to which she simply calmed his worries by telling her that she was treated correctly. They continued talking for a bit more before Momo joined them. "Ah, Hikari, it seems that your eye is better now." In fact, she had forgotten about that, but now nothing was coming out of her eye, so she let it go. They had a conversation almost similar to Shoji's about the reason why the principal requested her presence. "Did you face that thing?" It seems that Momo was unaware of her confrontation with the Nomu, which led to her receiving a sermon from her president, which made little sense, considering that she was the one who saw her condition after facing the Nomu. Once classes were over, Hikari intended to go to the principal to finish talking about the details of her relocation. Only when she headed to the exit she saw how there was a large number of students looking at her class and also looking at him. "Whoa, they're piling up at the exit, what are you here for?" She heard her Mineta partner say that. "They're watching the competition late." Itsuki said that as he walked forward, placing himself directly in front of the crowd and right in front of Hikari. Mineta was quite upset, and Izuku could only apologize for Kitsuki's aggressive manner. "They want to see the guys who survived the villain's attack, they're examining us before the big battle, idiot." Itsuki explained before addressing the crowd. "There's no point in doing it, so why don't you go to hell, you damn extras." Itsuki said with a haughty air, being reprimanded by Iida. Hikari, feeling that it was quite unnecessary to stay, advanced towards the crowd and asked permission to pass. The students thought he was trying to escape, so they pushed him back. "Excuse me, but I have something to do and I need to pass." He tried again only to hear some mocking laughter before he was pushed. Hikari stood for a moment thinking about what to do to get through. "If you want to pass so much, then make us." He heard one of the crowd say that. "So I have to move them to get through?" He asked that to receive some laughs and try it if you can. "So?" The darkness left his body and formed a line in front of him that passed through the students, who were a little surprised. "Excuse me?" And the void expanded horizontally, moving the students and forming a hallway through which he walked even with the students held back. When he left the crowd, the void regrouped in his body and disappeared. He continued walking until he was lost in the hallways. What just happened?" a random student asked. Class 1A was equally surprised. Kitsuki was gritting his teeth, Todoroki looked sideways, Izuku was amazed at the level of control Hikari possessed, and the class in general had the same thought. Hikari, oblivious to these thoughts, continued moving forward. The week had passed. The first few days he spent organizing his things for the move, while at the same time training his physical abilities. Right now he was in one of his classes and was paying deep attention. Equations were definitely not his strong suit. He was tempted to ask Momo again, but he felt like he was abusing her kindness a little. Momo, on the other hand, was doing her best not to laugh at Hikari's concentrated face. It really wasn't funny, but the image the class had of him and the calm aura he radiated was a total contrast to the expression he was making, so she couldn't help but find it funny. "Excuse me, Yayoi Rozu-san." Momo was taken out of her thoughts when Hikari caught her attention. "I'm really having a problem with this part, could you help me please?" Momo, ever since she met Hikari, could never say no to her. She didn't know if it was because of the innocence on her face when she asked or because she simply had a huge weakness when asked about her knowledge. She was sure that she would be her first choice. "Right now I don't think I can, Hikari-san, but maybe I can teach you after class." Momo offered. Hikari thought about that for a few seconds. "That would help, thank you very much, Yayoi Rozu-san." Ioka listened to that from the front seat and couldn't help but think about the relationship those two had. Momo had become her best friend shortly after meeting them, although she was a little surprised by Momo's elegant way of speaking and moving, she explained that it was due to her upbringing as part of the important Yayoi Rozu family. On the other hand, the first impression she had of Hikari was a bit strange. In her eyes Hikari seemed like a child, really curious coming from possibly the strongest person in the class. Ioka found it funny the way Momo had fun at Hikari's expense. If it weren't for the fact that she knew her well, a person like Mina would believe that Momo was in love with Hikari upon noticing how much time she spent looking at the young albino. Even with that, she still noticed Momo's growing interest in her seatmate, although it definitely didn't reach the level of infatuation. She liked to tease her with it, along with Mina. It was somewhat worrying that Hikari didn't seem to talk to anyone else apart from Momo, not taking into account the occasional chats she had with Shoji and very rarely with Izuku. "You know, yeah, Momo, I think your classes would also benefit me." Momo didn't seem to have realized that she had heard, so she was surprised, but she quickly rejoined and accepted. "Excuse me, Yayoi Rozu-san, I'd like to join too." Shoji was the one who spoke from the other side of Hikari, surprising the two friends. Shoji, if he was honest, didn't need Momo's guidance that much, but the opportunity to see how Hikari related to her was too tempting. It was very entertaining, and they always managed to brighten his day when he saw the casual conversations they had. He always noticed Hikari's lack of social sense, and that always seemed to shake Momo, that, and the fact that Shoji felt the need to try to protect Hikari from bad situations, despite being much stronger than him, as happened with a little misunderstanding they had in the locker room. "Well, the more the better," Momo said with a polite smile. After class, the small group of four met in the school library and began the reinforcement class instructed by Yayoi Rozu Momo. Momo explained the subject and each student's individual doubts that happened during the first 30 minutes. Now they were solving exercises that Professor Ectoplasm had assigned them as homework. "Haha, having friends to help you with these things is really the best," Ioka mentioned as she casually finished another exercise. "Friends?" Suddenly, everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at Hikari, who seemed to be thinking deeply. "Is something wrong?" Shoji asked. Hikari was brought out of her thoughts upon hearing her question. "I was wondering about the term friends." It was the obvious answer that made everyone pay more attention. "What are you wondering about?" Momo was the one who asked this time, and Hikari looked in her direction. "Well, I really don't know many things, but the main thing is when I can know that someone became my friend." His classmates remained silent. Hikari really didn't understand relationships, he didn't need it, why would he? His parents died, his life is about coping with everything by himself, no one lent him a hand, and the only person who openly said he was his friend was Izuku, but maybe it was due to the circumstances they were in, knowing All Might's secret obviously. "Maybe I already became friends with someone and I'm not able to realize it, am I friends with any of you?" It was a question that vaguely crossed his mind, but that he never took seriously until this moment. Of course, Hikari was very antisocial, so relationships themselves were complicated for him to understand. "Why do you ask that?" "Of course we're friends." Momo spoke, maybe some anger appeared in her mouth when she said that, but maybe it was the fact of not being acknowledged by him that caused it. "Are we?" It was more of a question to himself than to them. Izuku almost never spent time with him, so it's hard to say when a person is close enough to be considered as such. "Of course," Shoji said, clearly feeling that it was necessary for Hikari to realize how others saw him, that it helped considerably in the conception of bonds. "I see, so I have more friends now." The warm feeling flooded Hikari's mind, she never felt it before, and she could slightly feel it when Izuku confirmed their friendship. She didn't understand the difference between that moment and now, but it didn't matter at the moment. By the way, if you see that Hikari has a changing personality and there are moments where feelings are actually shown, they are only a reflection of how human she is, and the void is what neutralizes her feelings because it confuses them with the light of you-know-who. I'll explain it now, but more will be said later. After that the atmosphere became warmer and they were able to study more comfortably. Time flew by and before they knew it they were done with everything. Phew, that was all. Ioka mentioned while stretching slightly. Momo smiled at that and nodded. "Excuse me but I have to go now," Hikari said while gathering all her things. "So soon?" Shoji asked. Hikari couldn't really read the expression on his face, so she nodded. "I still have to do housework, thank you very much for the lesson," he said bowing in front of Momo, who seemed slightly thoughtful. "Do you want me to take you home?" Momo said although she had hesitated at first. "Take me?" Hikari tilted her head slightly to the side. "Ah well, they're coming to pick me up in a moment and I thought I could take you to your house," Momo said, seeming somewhat embarrassed for not having explained herself well. "Okay." After thinking it over, Hikari replied she didn't see a problem, so she had no reason to reject it. "Good." Momo clapped, then offered it to the others, but they declined her invitation. Don't worry, my house isn't too far away. Shoji said politely. They're coming to pick me up too, so don't worry. Hyoka said casually as she grabbed her things. Hikari finished packing her things and followed Momo, who was walking towards the exit with Shoji, Hyoka following behind him. There was a small chat before they went their separate ways. Momo and Hikari stayed at the entrance, while Hyoka and Shoji went their separate ways. It was a surprise to see a limousine pull up in front of them. A man in a suit got out and offered the door to Momo, who turned to look at him. Come on, we'll take you. He said with a light smile. Hikari blinked slightly and nodded as she followed Momo into the limousine, spending a few seconds looking inside. I know. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but my family cares a lot. He said, casually scratching his cheek with an embarrassed look. I'm fine with it. I've never been in a limousine, so I was just curious. Hikari said calmly, showing no expression again. The driver asked him the address of his apartment, which he gave and started driving. Is it difficult living alone? Momo asked cautiously, she was afraid it might set in the atmosphere. I don't really know, you just have to get used to it, there are many things to do. He said calmly as he looked out the window, the twilight reflected on the glass. Is that so? Hikari nodded. I have to clean the house every day, cook, feed Kuro, do laundry and tidy up, that's not counting my personal hygiene, the academy and training. Hikari listed reflexively. Kuro? Momo asked. It's my cat, for some reason I couldn't help but bring it with me when I found it on the street. She said. That's great, they don't let me have pets, they say they're a distraction. Momo muttered sadly. Not really, Kuro knows how to behave. She said looking slightly towards Momo. Can I see him? Momo asked politely, though hope escaped her words. Sure. Hikari nodded. When they arrived she invited Momo inside and couldn't help but be surprised when she almost knocked the wind out of Kuro, who was trying to get out of the hug Momo was giving him. Sorry, I think he can't breathe. He said a little nervously, certainly not expecting that reaction, and it took him a little by surprise. Oh yeah, sorry. He said quickly as he gently placed Kuro on the ground, only for him to escape into his owner's arms. Calm down, though I wasn't expecting that. Hikari said as she received Kuro and gently stroked him to calm him down. Well, it's just that I really like cats. She said while looking away. Calm down, I don't think Kuro will hate you for long. Hikari said a little more neutrally than usual. Does he really hate me? Momo worried a little, after all she really loved cats. It was a joke. Hikari said. The bolt of lightning struck Momo's head, a joke. Does she know how to make jokes? Could it be considered a joke? I thought friends made jokes, shouldn't I? Hikari tilted her head slightly in confusion. She couldn't tell if he was serious or not, but she wanted to laugh at the confused expression on his face, although more than expression, it was the tilt of his head that made her laugh. You scared me well I have to go. She said when she managed to calm her laughter. I hope you have a good afternoon. Hikari said as she bowed slightly. Likewise. Momo bowed in the same way before heading back to the limo. Hikari meanwhile entered her home and quickly fed Kuro before starting to clean and organize everything. She changed her clothes and began to collect the dirty clothes, although it was really hard to consider them dirty. The albino was actually quite hygienic with everything. The fact is that after she left her home with the dirty clothes in the direction of a local laundromat, she hadn't really bought a washer or dryer, so it was the easiest way to get a wash. It wasn't long before she left there, after all she didn't have a mountain of clothes. When she got home she prepared dinner, after eating she did some light training before taking a bath and resting a bit watching TV. A report appeared about what happened with the Monomon laboratory, but it didn't show the details of the event and why it was attacked, also a more enthusiastic news about the attack that occurred in USJ. After that she simply went to sleep, there was no need to study now that she could understand the subject better thanks to Momo. Chapter 7. Vi. The next morning passed uneventfully, his normal routine repeated itself. Although Hikari felt slightly watched by his classmates, one group in particular approached him when break began. Nana, have you thought about fixing your hair? Mina Shido asked enthusiastically while being accompanied by Aoyama and Issei. Not really, is it something important? Hikari had no problem interacting with anyone, the only reason he never made a friend when he was in middle school was because people thought he was arrogant for never starting a conversation, some considered his conversations boring, and his androgynous appearance tended to make both girls and boys uncomfortable. That and when he was a child he had gained a bad reputation due to an incident that occurred at his orphanage that involved him, although that is a story for another time. Well then, can we fix it for you, please? She bowed with her hands in a sign of supplication. Well. Really? Oh really? Yay, come on Aoyama help me. She celebrated as she dragged Aoyama by the arm. Issei stood like a judge as the two played with the albino's hair. "You will be brilliant, although of course not as brilliant as me." Aoyama commented as he took a comb and moved the hair on his forehead. Mina gave suggestions. They spent a while trying out styles until they decided to do a style similar to Aoyama's, although his hair was very long, so it completely covered his right eye. And to top it off, Mina took a hair tie and made a low ponytail. Because her hair was somewhat long, she was able to do it, although it didn't stand out too much from the front, it looked quite good from behind and left her face more exposed. Whoa, I didn't think it would actually turn out that good. To be expected coming from me. I'm certainly surprised, Kiro. Mina was thoughtful for a moment until she suddenly messed up the front of her hair and everything scattered, leaving the style just like it was before she combed her hair. BHH, what are you doing? I did that part, why are you messing it up? Aoyama looked indignant. Well, I think it looked good, but I don't think it's his style, you know, he looks like a spoiled brat or something. He said dismissively as a rain cloud settled over Aoyama's head. In the end it seems they only made the tail low, Kiro. Mina looked at Hikari from the side, analyzing him. I think it looks good like this anyway. For Hikari, who didn't understand much of the situation, she just watched in silence. Well, I'm already hungry, let's go, Issei-chan. He said as he dragged the frog girl. It seems you have potential, but you'll never shine like me. He said dramatically as he walked away following the girl duo. Hikari watched in silence, she didn't understand much of what happened but decided to ignore it. She headed to the dining room, there was an empty table where she sat with her lunch ready to be devoured. He wasn't really too bothered by his hair, he was never attracted to fashion, the most he could say about interactions with fashion was when a girl in a company uniform suddenly approached him and asked him about a type of modeling. He rejected her because he was quite busy studying and training his body for the UA exam. The day passed without much incident due to his transfer to the UA facilities that he was asked to make. He went to the director's room to receive instructions. Well, I see you're ready to move, I guess. There's a team waiting outside. You should accompany them so there are no problems. We've already spoken with the owner of the apartment you're renting, so don't worry about the legal issues. That was what the director told him. The young albino obeyed, and the procedure occurred without many problems. The only thing that happened was that Kuro almost scratched a member of the moving team when he wanted to move him from the sofa to put him on the truck. The truth is Kuro is very capricious when Hikari is not around, for that reason he did not scratch Momo when he almost drowned the poor cat. At this moment Hikari was riding in the moving team's vehicle with Kuro on her lap. The sunset could be seen from the vehicle window. Hikari looked at the sun, but not for the reason one would expect. Destroy the light that invades the minds of the weak. That voice that repeated that phrase in his mind seemed deep and dark, he couldn't really hear it speak, it was more of a message that needed to be seen, a command in his mind calling out his true nature. His blood turned hot, demanding to destroy the light source. Are you okay? The person next to him brought him out of his trance. I'm fine. It was the only thing he could answer at this moment. His mind that was clouding slowly cleared, although the uncertainty he felt did not fade away, his instincts clung to the walls of his unconscious. I'm sure you must be tired, moving house is never an easy process. He was probably speaking from experience, but Hikari didn't feel tired, nor uncomfortable, it was like feeling nothing, he didn't understand, but it seemed that slowly it began to affect him less on a daily basis. Of course. It was his short response. Right now you could say he was not in the mood for chatter, he had a lot of things on his mind. It wasn't long after they got everything in order, because there was another team of people waiting to help put everything away. Hikari was now in her new room, on top of her bed, staring thoughtfully at the ceiling. He had to turn off the light because he had a sudden urge to destroy the bulb. He got up again and prepared dinner, ate quietly, fed Kuro and cleaned himself before deciding to finally rest. The day of the festival finally arrived. It started relatively calmly for Hikari, as always, really. The only thing different about her routine when she arrived at UA was that she didn't have to bring any school supplies like her notebooks and other things that made her backpack feel empty. When I arrive at his classroom, I wait for his classmates and Professor Aizawa, who upon arrival demanded that they change into their sports uniform and head to the stadium. The journey was quiet for everyone except Izuku for obvious reasons, but there were no incidents. They spent a few minutes in the waiting room before a worker arrived and announced to his class that they should get ready to leave. The hallway was long, yet the crowd could still be heard shouting in the stands. Hikari's blood heated up again. Ever since the day of the move she felt sudden violent urges towards concentrated light sources, although she could easily dismiss those urges, she was usually in a bad mood because of it, if you can even call it a bad mood. The UA Sports Festival. Where the apprentices of the world of heroes aim for each other's throats and also for the top. The loud, excited voice came over the speakers. Our great annual contest. Let me guess, you all came to see them, right? The miracle stars who with nerves of steel took care of a massive villain attack. From the hero department, the freshman class. Finally, the corridor ended and they could look at the stadium full of people who had their eyes fixed on them. You're here for Class 1A, right? Izuku was trembling at the prospect of so many eyes watching them. After their presentation, Class 1B's performance came, which was not as acclaimed as Class 1A's, which seemed to bother some. Okay, play fair. Midnight the 18 heroine appeared on the podium while demanding order from the students. Tokoyami muttered about whether it was okay for an 18 heroine to be in a high school, though Midnight quickly denied his accusation, which they didn't expect. Now class representatives come forward, Katsuki Bakugo from Class 1A. Katsuki was slightly surprised but didn't take it seriously and walked to the podium. EHH. Kaken is our manager. Izuku said nervously. Man, I thought it would be Hikari, you know he came first in the entrance exam. Pantacero mentioned confused. The explosive young man ignored Midnight as he stood in front of the microphone. A few seconds of silence passed. I promise I'll be number one. Katsuki said calmly. Man, I knew this was going to happen. Kirishima mentioned embarrassed. Don't bet on luck Class 1A. A random guy from Class 1B dared to shout. Why do you insist on degrading our image? Iida asked, upset. Because you will be perfect steps, I'm sure. Another wave of boos followed after that. After that spectacle, no one paid attention to the representative of Class 1B and the other classes, and they skipped directly to the events. More so because they are not mentioned in the manga, and I think not in the anime either. Okay, with this we can move directly to our first event. Midnight said as a screen appeared behind her with a roulette wheel on it. In the preliminaries, as they're called, a lot of good people end up drowning in their tears here every year, and the first of this year's round of destiny is. Midnight cheered dramatically as the roulette wheel began to stop. An obstacle course. The large gate with a traffic light opened, showing the 11 classes the way forward. It's a race between the 11 classes, the track makes a ring of almost 4 kilometers around the stadium. We always talk about our freedom on campus, Fufufu, well that's what it's about, you are free to do anything, anyone, as long as you stay within the track. Midnight explained as the classes lined up at the opening door. Let's get on your marks. Sweat dripped from a few, Hikari found himself calm as he analyzed the door. The size was going to be difficult to access due to the crowd, but it was not something Hikari should worry about. Listuos. The muscles of all participants tensed in anticipation as they watched the traffic light. Start. And so chaos broke out, everyone running towards the same destination, some faster, some slower, but they stopped dead in their tracks when the starting gate squeezed everyone except one. Hikari used the void to pierce through the entire crowd, who were surprised by this, although they could do nothing to stop it. He heard something freeze behind him, but he didn't turn around and kept running. Some robots tried to get in his way but were easily defeated. A 0-point robot appeared in his vision, being energetically introduced by his English teacher and pro-hero present Mick. I didn't expect that. Hikari said to himself as he prepared himself again, an idea crossed his mind. He ran faster with the help of the void and jumped over the giant robot's hand and continued running up its arm and reached its head. He quickly dodged some missiles and positioned himself at the back of the robot's head. I hear the sound of something freezing again, but that didn't stop him. He gathered the power of the void in his feet and propelled himself forward, surprisingly dodging the rest of the 0-point robots that crossed his path. In the air he looked at his next obstacle, a cliff full of platforms with ropes. He wasn't really bothered, he was still in the air. He heard explosions behind him, but ignored them again and concentrated. The void generated improvised wings, and with the previous momentum helped it glide slightly. I reached the end although I rolled to be able to land better. Now I look back slightly, only to see Todoroki approaching quickly and Katsuki hot on his heels. Without further hesitation he continued running, until he reached a flat wasteland, full of mines. Todoroki walked past him as he froze everything below him. Hikari summoned the power of the void back into her hands, and in the form of a whip she grabbed onto one of the ice spikes Todoroki was leaving behind. He ran and propelled himself into the air thanks to the whip that provided an additional boost, generating vacuum wings again. He did something similar to a double jump and glided again. Itsuki moved into his lake, propelling himself with explosions and growling curses at him. Well, remember how bright lights made him have violent impulses and get into a bad mood. Because an explosion passed near his face, the light it generated and the events made him unable to contain the impulse to try to destroy it. The whip formed on his arm as he undid the wings. The whip grabbed Katsuki by the stomach and pulled him to the ground as he propelled himself with it. It looked more violent due to the speed at which things happened, since right where Katsuki fell there was a mine which caused an explosion. Luckily, Kitsuki was unharmed and quickly tried to regain his rhythm by shouting obscenities. Unfortunately for him, Hikari now positioned herself first over Todoroki. Although he didn't expect Izuku to walk past him on a piece of metal. It didn't end there because with a whiplash, Izuku made the piece step on another mine and propelled it directly towards the goal. Hikari could only watch, although he could have done the same as with Kitsuki, he was able to contain himself in time because the explosion detonated a little further from him. And so Izuku was in first place, Hikari ran the last Mura without worrying, and Todoroki tried to catch him, but it was too late when Hikari crossed the finish line. Kitsuki following behind Todoroki a little later burning with rage and frustration. The other contestants arrived, but Hikari couldn't help but watch as Mineta clung to Momo's butt, who looked embarrassed as she tried to pull it off while running toward the finish line. HHH, I can't believe it, you really are the worst. Momo complained as she reached the finish line. Mineta on the other hand, remained determined to cling to the taller girl's butt. Hikari, who was standing next to Momo, blinked for a moment before, with a whip of emptiness, sending Mineta away from her partner's rear. Thanks for that. Momo said while panting. Hikari nodded and approached Midnight, who was preparing to give the explanation of Event 2 of the festival. The first 42 participants to arrive have the right to advance. I feel sorry for those who failed, but they have to endure it. Midnight tried to encourage those who didn't qualify, which helped a few and depressed several more. And now for the preliminary post-qualifications, the final selection. He said, drawing the attention of the remaining 42 participants. Now in the exciting second event, I already know what it's going to be, but the suspense is still killing me. He said excitedly, as the roulette wheel that appeared behind his back began to stop. Admire, the pitch battle. The audience roared with excitement. We participants were a little cautious about the new test. The test consists of survival. In general there must be 12 remaining participants. It is worth doing almost anything, of course without seriously injuring any participant, which are disqualified in 2 ways, being unconscious or surrendering. In any case there will be medical teams throughout the field. The field will be a labyrinth, which will have endless non-lethal traps to make survival difficult. As it is a survival test you just have to stand until the next round. It does not matter if you flee throughout the test. I explain in detail the game time, and I also explain that once inside the maze it will close until the winners are selected. Hikari listened silently as the other participants began to think of plans to survive, most of them wanting to take down Class 1, and even more so those who finished in the top 10 winners in the obstacle course. Some even started forming teams to fight for survival and take down their toughest opponents. All participants were transported separately to cabins that led to an underground level. Hikari was in her cabin waiting for the moment the test began. Her mind was quite absent at this moment. His body began to emanate emptiness that surrounded him slightly. When the start alarm sounded and the door opened, the emptiness disappeared and Hikari woke up. It's time. He said as he walked forward and entered the maze. The hallways were apparently lined with steel to prevent collapses. Hikari wondered how the academy got so many resources to build something like that. There were also cameras located in the corners and upper walls, assuming it was so that spectators wouldn't miss the spectacle. Suddenly I arrive at a room with several corridors in it. Hikari advanced until she was in the center of the room when she heard multiple footsteps approaching. Several participants emerged from the corridors. In total, 12 participants came out of the corridors. They looked at each other and then at Hikari. We must take down the big one first. There are 12 of us, we could team up for this test. The girl said as she tried to convince the others to join her. The other participants discussed it for a moment before agreeing. At this moment the only common goal was Hikari. Hikari, then, just stood there, watching as the others began to join forces to defeat him and advance to the next stage. Well, we should disqualify him now, so we can move forward more easily in getting rid of him. Another boy said as he walked forward. You should give up now, Pale One, that way you'll save yourself the humiliation. His companion said as he joined him. Do you want to humiliate me? Hikari asked confused. Of course we want to, you've been showing off since the festival started, just seeing you irritates me a lot. Another person said as he walked forward. They'll fight me, won't they? Our young albino said a little louder. Oh, don't get me wrong, this isn't a fight, it's a one-sided massacre. Said a guy with a crooked smile while thorns of some kind came out of his arms. Well, I hope they don't get hurt too much. Hikari said as the void seemed to dance around her. The group seemed to burst into a rage as they ran towards Hikari who was waiting in her place. The first one with swollen red arms tried to strike first. Hikari slid underneath him as the vacuum built up in his fist slightly. The red-armed guy tried to cover himself, only to be sent a couple of meters back when the vacuum fist connected. Another attempt to surprise Hikari from behind, but he tripped when Hikari kicked low towards his heels, causing him to lose his balance and fall. He couldn't finish it off when a girl tried to kick him in the head, only to be dodged by stepping back. Another boy tried to hit him with an arm covered in fragments of some kind of metal. Hikari grabbed the arm before it connected and deflected it towards the girl who tried to hit her head. The girl was so surprised that she couldn't avoid the blow, which hit her stomach and made her kneel. The boy tried to apologize only to receive a kick to the head from Hikari that sent him to the ground, dizzy and angry. The tall guy with long limbs caught Hikari in his arms. "Eyes, I got it here." The void surrounded Hikari's body and expanded violently, managing to separate himself from the guy who had him trapped. "I must save my strength. I can't use the void so often without it draining my stamina. It's best to use hand-to-hand combat and use the void at crucial moments." Hikari thought as a duo approached, one with a punch surrounded by some kind of glow and the other with a spiked kick to the shin. I grabbed the arm of the guy who tried to throw a punch and throw him towards the girl with the thorns on her legs. The girl stopped and dodged the blow. "I won't fall like the other one," he said with a laugh that was silenced when he turned around and found a foot embedded in his face. The boy received an elbow in his back that served as support for the kick he threw at the girl. When the boy fell, another tried to throw himself at Hikari's back. I jumped towards the red-armed boy from the beginning who was just getting up and punched him in the face. "One out," he thought as he looked at the unconscious boy on the ground. "Demons, you're underestimating us, just use your quirk," said the girl who had thorns on her legs. "It's still very strong," said the boy with steel fragments in his arms. "I have ranged attacks, I could distract him while you attack," said a girl holding stones in her hands with some sort of cannon attached to her palms. "Okay, let's go," the long-limbed boy roared as he ran towards Hikari. This time they were surprised when Hikari jumped towards them. The boy with steel fragments in his arms tried to block what appeared to be a kick, only for it to be used as a platform to jump back towards the tall, long-limbed boy. The boy tried to catch him only to be hit in the head with a kick that disoriented him, and then he was grabbed by the head and slammed into the ground. "Two out." Hikari continued counting as he lunged towards the girl with the stones, only to be intercepted by one of the girls from the beginning. "You'll have to go over me first," the girl exclaimed as her hands grew bigger. "Good," Hikari said calmly as she covered herself with emptiness and pierced the girl with large hands. The girl behind her tried to shoot a rock, but was scared when she saw that it was Hikari's target. "I'm laughing," I exclaimed with my arms in the air while closing my eyes. When she opened them she saw Hikari looking at her right in front of her. "Three out." Hikari thought only to be sent flying into a steel wall when the big-handed girl hit him from behind. When he stood up he was greeted by the boy who had fragments of steel in his arms. I tried to hit him, only to be grabbed by the head and slammed against the wall, leaving him stunned and then receive a blow to the cheek, rendering him unconscious. 4 out, 8 more to go. Hikari thought as she stood up with some difficulty. "Who's next?" Hikari said as the emptiness began to surround her limbs slightly. Hikari saw out of the corner of her eye a foot coming at high speed towards her face. She moved her head a little, dodging the kick. "Oops, I thought I hit him," the girl said as she picked up her foot and put it back together. "They have problematic quirks, I'll have to use the vacuum more often, it seems," he thought as he walked towards the group of participants. The cocky guy from the beginning turned his hands into claws and moved forward. "Don't think you're so special, palm-eyed guy," he shouted as he attacked with his hands trying to cut Hikari who easily dodged the blows. "These blows aren't as fast as the USJ beasts," Hikari thought as she grabbed the subject's left arm and pulled it to her right, unbalancing him and leaving him open to the vacuum blow that embedded itself in his face, leaving him unconscious on the ground several meters away from him. 5 out, he thought as he ran towards the girl who could separate his body. "Hey, it looks like I'm next, right?" the girl said amusedly as she separated her body to walk away. But his plan was foiled when the void caught all the separated parts and pulled them towards Hikari. "Hey, isn't that a little unfair?" the girl said with a smile across her mouth that was separated from the rest of the pieces. "Is it also fair to attack me with several people?" Hikari thought as she hit the girl's head, knocking her unconscious as her body reattached itself. 6 out, 6 more to go. I can't believe it, he defeated half of us so quickly," the boy with long hair said while shaking. "Don't give up, we can still beat him," said the girl with big hands, accompanied by a girl with thorny hair. "Come on," insisted Hikari, already beginning to feel physical exhaustion. "I'll have to improve my stamina," he thought to himself. Unlike his fight with the Nomu, here it was his opponents who controlled the pace of the battle, which consumed more of his energy, although he already has enough resistance. That's why he was able to defeat the first 6, although well, Hikari has very little common sense, so he didn't know that. The group ran towards him and tried to reach him with their quirks, only to be impaled by the void-coated Hikari. They turned around but didn't see Hikari. The girl with big hands heard footsteps behind her, she turned urgently and tried to back away, which she managed since Hikari was not there. A noise was heard beside her, and she turned to see her spiky-haired companion lying unconscious on the ground. 7 out. Hikari then attacked the trembling long-haired boy who was helpless as he was hit in the head with a kick, knocking him unconscious. 8 out, 4 more to go. This time he didn't see it coming when the girl with big hands hit him on the head, sending him flying again. "It's moving too fast," said the boy near the girl with big hands when he saw his fallen companions. Hikari bounced off the steel wall with blood pouring from her head and falling onto her face and eyes. That's kind of annoying," Hikari said as she stood up with difficulty. "I'll have to deal with you first it seems." For that girl named Itsuka Kendo, those words were darker than they actually were. That and the image of the albino with blood on his face did not give a very good impression. This persistent feeling. She couldn't help but tremble at his gaze. Hikari took a step, the remaining 4 people took a step back. Why are they retreating? Those words stopped them in their tracks, their frightened look slowly began to fade, but they didn't disappear, they couldn't disappear because they knew they were walking straight into something dangerous. "I have to face it, but it's like walking right into some predator," a blue-haired boy thought, trying to gain courage. Hikari took another step, none of the participants backed down, they just waited for her to move forward. Hikari wiped the blood from her face with her hand before beginning to increase her pace. The boy with blue hair fired a plasma-like beam of light towards Hikari. The young Alvine rolled on the ground, dodging it, and began to move faster. "Why didn't you say you could do that?" the black-haired girl yelled at her partner. "I can't use it too much and I wanted to save it for you," the panicked boy shouted his intentions. Hikari continued moving forward while they argued. The girl enlarged her hands and attacked again, our young albino pierced her hands and stopped in front of the girl. Hikari took the girl's arms by the biceps and held her while the vacuum ran through her arms, reinforcing them. Hikari lifted the girl and threw her towards the blue-haired boy who was caught mid-shoot. Hikari moved forward behind the girl's thrown body and passed through her when she collided with the blue-haired boy. Standing behind both targets, Hikari turned around and launched a powerful empty punch. The boy who received the greatest impact was instantly knocked unconscious and the girl followed him when her head hit the wall behind her hard. 2 down, 2 more to go. The last 2 were looking at him scared. How do they expect us to get out of this? I give up," one of them said as he fell to his knees, the other watched him fall and ran away. "There's only 1 left. The test isn't over yet, so I need to keep eliminating targets, don't take it personally," Hikari said as she ran after the other participant, entering the tunnel she had fled through. It was dark and hard to see, but Hikari didn't stop to think about it. Suddenly he stumbled and hit the ground with his face. "That was weird," Hikari said as he stood up, only to be punched in the cheek, knocking him to the ground again. "Haha, you're not so rude now, are you?" The young albino couldn't respond because he received a kick in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. "My quirk allows me to hide in dark places, I was just running away to bring you here. Isn't it foolish to reveal your skill in a battle?" Hikari covered his head with his arms hoping to avoid harm, only to be hit in the back with a kick. "Let me tell you, I can see perfectly in this place, so your efforts are useless, give up before it gets worse." The young albino couldn't tell where the voice was coming from, but the persistent pain and the shaking in his brain disoriented him enough that he couldn't hear a direction. "I have to locate her somehow." Hikari was finally able to stand up, after a great effort, she raised her guard over her head. "I can't see her, but I don't need to. I won't be able to dodge her attacks, but I just need to attack first." Our young albino waited, received a blow to his right side, Hikari doubled over in pain, but did not let down her guard, she heard a step to her left and waited, received a blow to the chin, which made her look up. "I'll wait for it to get closer." Hikari stood with her guard up, with a plan made in her mind, she waited for the right moment to make it work. "I hear a step behind him, but it was too far away, I wait longer, he could withstand another blow. If I catch her, I must defeat her immediately, not give her a chance to respond." He heard the sound of footsteps trying to approach quietly behind him, Hikari didn't look in their direction, instead he kept his ears alert. "One more step and it will be enough." A step was taken. Hikari's body exploded into nothingness, expanding violently to ensnare its target. The girl didn't expect it, when she was caught the void moved her body in front of Hikari. "I found you." The girl could only tremble, she tried to flee, it didn't occur to her to give up, not when danger was so close to her. The void gathered in Hikari's fist. The poor conceited girl could only watch as the empty fist approached her face. Hikari watched as the girl flew out the tunnel entrance. "That was all," he said to himself. Hikari came out of the tunnel and saw the girl from before lying on the ground with her fist marked on her face. Our young albino walked silently to the center and sat down for a moment. The bodies of the others are already gone, they should have been taken out to see their wounds. Suddenly a pair of robots came out of a nearby wall, picked the girl up from the ground, and left as if nothing had happened. That answers everything. Hikari waited a few minutes, catching her breath, her wounds starting to hurt as the adrenaline left her body. He couldn't complain when he felt the room suddenly turn cold. So here you were. Hikari turned around to see her classmate Shoto Todoroki coming out of one of the tunnels. Were you looking for me? Hikari asked only to receive silence. Todoroki continued walking until he completely exited the tunnel. That's right, I came to defeat you. Hikari tilted his head in confusion and slowly stood up. The two looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. May I ask why? Todoroki considered his answer for a moment. You are strong, I know I can beat you, but you were still able to overcome me somehow, I will prove here, and now that I am stronger than you, and I will take the number 1 spot. Hikari thought about her answer for a moment. Why is being number 1 so important? Shouldn't I go after Izuku instead? He came in first after all. The floor beneath Todoroki began to freeze, the tunnel entrances becoming covered in ice. I'm a little hurt, I have little energy left to use the void, I don't think fighting would be ideal, but I won't be able to run away either. Hikari got into position. The ice shot out at him. It's fast. Hikari dodged the ice blocks that were hurtling towards him. Ranged attacks are the most difficult to deal with. Taking advantage of the ice on the ground, Hikari slid while dodging the attacks. The space is getting smaller, I'll have to attack in a moment before I get boxed in. Hikari slid under an ice pillar, causing the previous attack to collide with it. He had no time to create a plan of attack because he was being pressured by constant pillars of ice. In no time, the room was infested with ice, pillars and stakes everywhere. Todoroki began to feel the effects of using his ice too much, but he still didn't stop. Hikari was trapped, everywhere he looked there was ice, it was some kind of dome or igloo. Todoroki-san is in front of me, if there's no way to dodge, I'm going to attack. Without Todoroki seeing it, the void covered his body, swirling violently in silence. The fire and ice user, on the other hand, began to approach the dome he created, slowly approaching due to the ice covering its right side. He found it curious that he hadn't used his quirk throughout the fight, which also bothered him. It seemed like he wasn't taking it seriously. Hikari gathered the emptiness into a sphere in front of him, spinning and spinning, expanding and shrinking violently. After this I will only be able to transfer the objects one more time. Using his hands, he prepared the launch, placing the sphere in front of him. It won't be able to kill him, with so much ice the power will be reduced, I think. He didn't think about it any longer and let her go. Todoroki didn't see it coming. Waya. A primal, beastly scream escaped the creature expelled from Hikari's hands. The same appearance it took when I threw the ball in the quirk's apprehension test, only much more violent and larger when it shot out. It destroyed everything in front of it, even the ice-covered ground, the dome shattered like a paper wall, it didn't stop it at all, it kept moving forward. Todoroki was luckily a little further to the right than where Hikari had aimed, the vacuum having barely ripped any of the clothing on his left arm. He couldn't even react to the speed at which he was moving. When the vacuum creature reached the opposite wall it exploded, destroying the ice in a 5-meter radius, almost trapping Todoroki who had to cover his face, as the pieces of ice flew out due to the pressure. I came out stronger than I thought, lucky I aimed badly. Hikari commented to himself. What the hell was that, it could have killed me. Todoroki whispered to himself as he contemplated the destruction that attack caused. Hikari stepped forward. The ice and fire user turned his head towards Hikari, on alert. Our young albino ran towards Todoroki, who sent a pillar of ice to attack him. Hikari stepped aside and continued to approach quickly. Being so close, Todoroki threw another pillar. Now. Hikari covered himself with emptiness and passed through the pillar with Todoroki behind him. Todoroki turned to see Hikari behind him, preparing a normal punch, knowing that he wouldn't have time to dodge it or create an ice barrier, he waited for the punch to land. It's over, all the fights are over, all the exit doors are open, head to the waiting room or the infirmary to receive attention. They heard Present Mick's voice, breaking the moment, Hikari stopped before throwing the punch and turned around. Todoroki watched the young albino's back as he retreated, clenching his fist in anger and frustration. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown in left. Thank you for watching, if you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day, bye.